Hey everyone, and welcome to another story of Cheating Tales Lab. We're honored to have you here today. Thank you for being part of our community, and we hope this story captivates you. Now, let's dive into this story. The metallic whir of helicopter blades sliced through Seattle's rain-heavy clouds as Antonio Sheridan steadied his patient's foreline. At 45, he'd spent exactly half his life as Seattle's premier trauma flight nurse, and every one of those years showed in the precise economy of his movements. Rain pattered against the helicopter's windows as Jake Morrison, his pilot and friend of 20 years, guided them towards Seattle Grace Hospital. Stats dropping, Antonio called through the headset, his experienced hands already moving to adjust the flow rate. "Jake, we need to pick up the pace." "Already on it," Jake responded, the helicopter banking smoothly as he adjusted their trajectory. 3 minutes out. Antonio nodded, his focus absolute as he monitored the patient's vitals. This was where he belonged, 3,000 feet above Seattle, making split-second decisions that kept people alive. The familiar pressure in his chest tightened slightly, but he ignored it. There would be time for personal concerns later. The landing pad emerged from the mist, its lights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Antonio had already radioed ahead. The trauma team would be waiting. As they touched down, he caught sight of his daughter Emma's white coat among the waiting staff. She'd followed him into medicine, though she'd chosen to keep her feet firmly on the ground. "Another miracle in the making," she called out as they rushed the patient inside. "No miracles," Antonio replied, his voice steady as he reported the vital signs. "Just good medicine." It was their usual exchange, comfortable and familiar. But lately, Emma's smile seemed strained, her eyes carrying a weight he couldn't quite understand. He filed the observation away with all the other small changes he'd noticed recently, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't yet assembled. The annual Seattle Grace Hospital fundraiser transformed the austere medical center's conference center into what Lori Sheridan, his wife of 23 years and head of donor relations, called an appropriate setting for seven-figure donations. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in imported silk, while Seattle's medical elite mingled with the city's wealthiest potential donors. Antonio adjusted his bow tie, a concession to the formal dress code he endured once a year. From his position near the bar, he had a clear view of Lori working the room. She moved with practiced grace in her silver Versace dress, a recent purchase she'd claimed was necessary for the position. Dr. Kent Pratt stood too close to her as they spoke with the elderly couple Antonio recognized as major donors. The new cardiothoracic surgeon had arrived 6 months ago with impressive credentials and an ego to match. Now, watching Kent's hands settle on Lori's lower back with casual familiarity, Antonio felt his investigative instincts spark to life. "Your wife certainly knows how to command a room." Sarah Chen's voice carried a note of careful observation as she joined him. Seattle Grace's administrator had been his friend for 15 years, long enough to know when she was probing for information. "She's good at her job," Antonio replied neutrally, noting how Lori and Kent moved between groups in perfect synchronization, their professional smiles never wavering. "Speaking of jobs," Sarah kept her voice low, "have you reviewed the proposal for the new cardiac wing? The one Kent's pushing for?" Numbers seemed rushed. Very rushed. Sarah sipped her champagne. "Interesting choice of contractors, too. Same company that built his wing in Portland. Facility had issues from day one, but the paperwork was impeccable." Before Antonio could respond, Emma appeared at his elbow. His daughter's emerald cocktail dress was a stark contrast to her usual resident scrubs, making her look more like her mother than he'd ever noticed before. "Dad, Mrs. Henderson wants to hear about the mountain rescue from last month." Emma's smile was bright but didn't reach her eyes. "You know, the one with the stranded hiking group?" Antonio caught the quick glance she shot toward Lori and Kent. "Mrs. Henderson can wait. Sarah and I were discussing." "Please." Emma's grip on his arm tightened fractionally. "She's considering a major donation to the emergency response unit." Sarah touched his sleeve lightly. "We'll continue this later, Antonio. Some things need a closer look." Her meaningful glance toward Kent and Lori made it clear she wasn't talking about hospital finances. As Emma led him away, Antonio watched Kent lean in to whisper something in Lori's ear. His wife's laugh carried across the room. the same practice sound she used when convincing donors to add zeros to their checks. The rest of the evening followed a pattern. Every time Antonio moved toward Lori and Kent, Emma appeared with another donor who urgently needed to hear his stories. By the time the last guest departed, he'd cataloged 27 instances of unnecessary physical contact between his wife and the surgeon, 15 secretive whispers, and 4 moments when they disappeared briefly from the room within minutes of each other. The drive home was silent, Lori claiming a headache and retiring immediately to their bedroom. Antonio stayed in his study, reviewing hospital documents Sarah had quietly passed him earlier. The numbers for the cardiac wing didn't add up, cost projections were inflated, equipment requests excessive, and the timeline suspiciously accelerated. His chest tightened as he worked, the pain sharper than usual. Another item for his growing list of concerns, filed away with his wife's recent changed behaviors and his daughter's strange anxiety. The following weeks brought a parade of closed-door meetings Lori claimed were donor consultations. Antonio used the time to investigate, his years of emergency response work making him methodical in gathering information. The contractor's bid is 40% higher than market rate. Jake confirmed over coffee in the pilot's lounge between flights. Same pattern as Portland, according to my contacts there. Antonio rubbed his chest absently. Sarah mentioned unusual consultation patterns in the cardiac unit. Private meetings not logged in the official schedule. Speaking of unusual, Jake leaned forward, voice low. You seen the maintenance contracts for the new equipment Kent's requesting? Companies I've never heard of, terms that make no sense for a hospital our size. Their discussion ended with the emergency alert. Minutes later, they were airborne, heading toward a multi-car pileup on Interstate 5. Antonio pushed personal concerns aside, focusing on the information coming through his headset. The chest pain struck during patient assessment. One moment he was checking pupillary response. The next device clamped around his heart. The pin light clattered to the helicopter floor as pain shot down his left arm. Antonio? Jake's voice seemed distant through the roaring in his ears. Left, chest. Antonio managed, training taking over even as his vision grayed. Radiating arm. Jake's response was immediate. Seattle Grace, Life Flight 7 declaring medical emergency. Flight nurse having severe chest pain, possible MI. Diverting for immediate landing. Antonio fumbled with his Garmin medical watch. Standard equipment Jake had insisted on after too many disputed in-flight decisions. Through the growing haze, he activated the recording feature, years of handling complicated cases having taught him to document everything. The last thing he saw before consciousness faded was Lori's face as they wheeled him into the ER. Her expression wasn't panic or concern. It was calculated satisfaction as she typed rapidly on her phone. Kent will take excellent care of everything, she said, voice carrying a note of anticipation that sent chills through Antonio's fading awareness. He's the best, after all. As darkness claimed him, he heard Kent Pratt's authoritative voice. I'm taking this case. Cancel the on-call, surgeon. Recovery brought a steady stream of suspicious activities. Insurance agents Antonio had never met appeared within hours, claiming Lori had contacted them months ago to review their policies. They spoke quietly with Kent between rounds. Their discussions focused on policy details, particularly the triple payout clause for in-hospital deaths. Quite forward-thinking of your wife, one agent remarked while checking Antonio's paperwork. Upgrading the policy when she did. These things are always easier to arrange before any incidents. Kent's residents monitored him constantly, except for Emma, who could barely enter the room. When she did, her hands shook as she checked his vitals, her eyes avoiding his face. Sarah visited late one night, after the residents' rounds. She closed the door carefully before approaching his bed. I've been looking into Kent's previous positions, she said quietly, showing him a folder. 5 hospitals in 10 years. Each had a string of deaths, terminal patients, all with massive insurance payouts. And every time, there was a grieving spouse who suddenly acquired beach property within months. Antonio studied the medication charts Sarah provided, his years of medical experience noting the discrepancies. The doses were subtly wrong, not enough to trigger immediate concerns, but sufficient to slowly stress a recovering heart. Your wife's name is on the title search for a beachfront property in Malibu, Sarah added. Dated 3 months ago, held in a blind trust until closing. The same realtor handled 3 similar properties for widows from Kent's previous hospitals. Before Antonio could respond, footsteps approached. Sarah slipped the folder away as Emma entered. Her white coat wrinkled from a long shift. Dad, she started, then stopped at the sight of Sarah. I should come back later. Stay, Antonio said firmly, but she was already backing toward the door, the same haunted look in her eyes he'd seen at the fundraiser. After she left, Sarah squeezed his hand. Rest. I'm having some people look into things. Just be careful what medications you accept. Antonio closed his eyes, appearing to drift off, but his hand moved slightly, ensuring his medical watch was still recording. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he assembled the pieces of the puzzle. His wife's suspicious behavior, Kent's rushed proposals, Emma's strange actions, and the growing evidence of a deadly pattern repeated across multiple hospitals. The pain in his chest was still there, but now it had a different quality. This wasn't just medical, this was betrayal, carefully planned and professionally executed. But Antonio Sheridan hadn't spent 20 years saving lives by giving up when things got difficult. He kept his breathing steady, listening as Kent's resident adjusted his medication drip. They thought they were dealing with a vulnerable patient, weakened by surgery and grief. They had no idea they'd given him exactly what he needed. A front-row seat to their operation, with every word and action recorded by the device on his wrist. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The midnight silence in Antonio's hospital room was broken only by the steady beep of monitors. His eyes remained closed, breathing measured, as familiar voices drifted through his partially open door. The Garmin watch on his wrist blinked silently, recording every word. The Cayman account is ready. Kent's voice carried a hint of impatience. Another week of this waiting game, and we risk someone connecting the patterns. Don't lecture me about patterns, Lori snapped. The clicking of her heels against tile indicated her pacing. I've managed 3 hospitals worth of paperwork without leaving traces. The Malibu property is nearly ready. We stick to the timeline. Your daughter's becoming erratic. Did you see how she fumbled the medication orders yesterday? Emma knows what's at stake. One call to the medical board about her little pharmaceutical adventure during residency, and she'll be lucky to work as a veterinary assistant. Their voices faded down the hallway. Antonio waited 5 minutes, then pressed the call button. Emma appeared moments later, her white coat wrinkled from a long shift, dark circles prominent under her eyes. Your stats look stable, she said mechanically, avoiding his gaze as she checked the monitors. Sit down. Antonio's voice was quiet, but carried the same authority he used during critical rescues. When she hesitated, he added, Remember that hiker we airlifted when you were 10? You held his hand the whole flight, promised him he'd be okay. That's who you are, Emma. Not this. The words hit their mark. Emma collapsed into the chair, tears breaking through her professional facade. I never wanted. During intern year, the hours were endless. Someone offered me Adderall to stay awake, then benzos to sleep. It spiraled so fast. Kent and your mother found out. She nodded miserably. They said they'd help keep it quiet, protect my career. But it was just leverage. First they wanted information about your schedule, access to your records, then medication adjustments, signing off on altered charts. Details. Antonio's voice hardened. Everything they've made you do. Start from the beginning. Emma's confession poured out. How Kent had backdated consultation notes, creating false histories of cardiac symptoms. How Lori used her donor relations position to identify wealthy patients with large insurance policies. The systematic way they stressed recovering hearts with subtle medication changes until natural cardiac events occurred. There are others, Emma whispered. Other residents they control. The private facility they're trying to transfer you to, it's owned by Kent's medical school friend. Patients who go there don't come back. Antonio's expression remained neutral, but his mind cataloged every detail. The medication changes. Show me. Emma pulled out his chart with trembling hands. They're subtle. Microdoses of medications that stress the heart. Nothing obvious enough to trigger pharmacy alerts, but compounding effects over time. She pointed to specific orders. These are all falsified. I signed some of them. You'll sign no more. His tone allowed no argument. Now listen carefully. Tomorrow morning, you'll do your rounds as usual. Act normal. When Kent or your mother give orders, agree. But do nothing. Understood? She nodded, wiping her eyes. Dad, I'm so... Save it. He cut her off. Redemption comes through actions, not words. Go. After she left, Antonio activated his phone. The call was answered on the first ring. Jake. Time to call in that favor from Reuben Benton. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Jake arrived early, carrying coffee and a thick folder of flight logs. Reuben's on board, he reported quietly. Been wanting to nail Kent since his Portland days. I've got documentation of every suspicious patient transfer over the last 6 months. All terminal patients, all wealthy, all dead within days of reaching his friend's private facility. Good. Antonio reviewed the logs. Sarah's blocking their attempt to transfer me there. They'll try something else. As if on cue, Lori swept in, designer heels clicking against tile. Her smile was practiced, predatory. Darling, we've been discussing your care options. Kent knows an excellent private facility. Request denied. Sarachin entered behind her, hospital administrator's badge prominent. Hospital policy requires peer review for high-risk transfers. Dr. Peterson will be taking over Antonio's care. Kent appeared in the doorway, his usual smooth confidence cracking slightly. As department head, Sarah's voice could have cut steel. You're needed in the board meeting. Now. After they left, Sarah turned to Antonio. Reuben's people are in place. We've got FBI agents posing as orderlies on every shift. Security cameras have been adjusted to cover medication storage areas. They'll retaliate, Jake warned. Antonio's smile was cold. I'm counting on it. The counterattack came within hours. Anonymous complaints about Antonio's flight record appeared on Sarah's desk, alleging missed protocols and questionable decisions during critical transports. Amateur work, Jake scoffed, reviewing them. I've got witness statements and documentation for every flight, every decision, every outcome. More concerning was the leak about Emma's drug history to the medical board. But Sarah Chun was prepared. Complete rehabilitation records, she informed the hastily convened review committee, laying out documented evidence. Regular drug tests, counseling sessions, performance reviews. All clean. I can also provide documentation showing who accessed these confidential records without authorization. The committee members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Someone was facing serious HIPAA violations. Meanwhile, Antonio's watch kept recording. Late-night conversations between Kent and Lori grew increasingly desperate. The insurance companies auditing previous cases, Kent hissed during one midnight visit. We need to finish this now. Then stop talking and do it. Lori's voice was ice. The transfer failed, but we still have medication access. Make it look natural, like the others. The final night arrived exactly as Antonio had predicted. His room was dark when Lori and Kent entered, carrying a new medication bag. Such a shame about these cardiac complications, Lori sighed, her voice dripping false concern. At least the triple payout will secure Emma's future. Speaking of payouts, Antonio's voice caused them both to freeze as he sat up, removing his oxygen mask. You should have checked my watch more carefully, honey. It records everything within 20 feet, including your murder plot. The lights flashed on. FBI agents emerged from the bathroom and supply closet, weapons drawn. Reuben Benton stepped forward, badge gleaming. Dr. Kent Pratt, Mrs. Lori Sheridan, he announced with satisfaction, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and a growing list of federal charges. You can't prove anything, Kent snarled, but his face had gone pale. Actually, Sarachin entered, holding up a tablet. We can prove everything. Your previous victims' families have been very cooperative, once shown evidence of insurance fraud and premeditated murder. As they were led away in handcuffs, Lori attempted one final strike. Emma was involved too. She falsified charts, changed medication order. Under documented coercion, Antonio cut her off coldly. Unlike you, she chose to help stop this before more people died. The arrest continued through the night. Insurance agents who had backdated policies, Kent's friend at the private facility who helped cover up suspicious deaths, the real estate agent holding the Malibu property in trust. Offshore accounts located, Rubin reported as the sun rose. Looks like they've been running this scheme longer than we thought. Multiple hospitals, dozens of victims. Good. Antonio's voice was steel. More evidence for prosecution. The morning brought a parade of federal agents collecting evidence and taking statements. Through it all, Antonio's watch kept recording, not because it was needed anymore, but because thorough documentation had become habit. Sarah Chin surveyed the activity with grim satisfaction. The board will be meeting to discuss emergency replacements in cardiology and donor relations. Check their references thoroughly this time, Antonio suggested, his voice carrying no trace of humor. Emma appeared in the doorway, looking lost. Dad, your statement to the FBI. Everything they made you do, everything you saw. Leave nothing out. His tone was professional, detached. The evidence you've provided helps ensure they can't hurt anyone else. She nodded, understanding the unspoken message. There would be time for personal reconciliation later. For now, there was work to be done. Through the window, dawn painted Seattle's skyline in shades of possibility. The conspirators who had thought Antonio vulnerable had learned too late what his patients had always known. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one who waits, watches, and strikes with calculated precision when the moment is right. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension as Antonio Sheridan took the witness stand. 6 months had passed since the arrests, and the trial had exposed a web of corruption deeper than anyone imagined. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Diana Hayes, approached with purpose. Mr. Sheridan, please tell the court about the evidence you gathered. Antonio's voice carried the same steady authority he used in medical emergencies. The watch recordings documented multiple conversations between Dr. Pratt and Lori Sheridan planning my murder. They discussed offshore accounts, property purchases, and how to make my death appear natural. From the defense table, Kent's expensive suit couldn't hide his seething anger. Lori sat beside him, her designer prison jumpsuit a far cry from her usual attire, her face a mask of cold disdain. In the previous cases? Hayes prompted. Investigation revealed similar patterns at 3 other hospitals. Kent would identify wealthy patients through Lori's donor relations network. They'd falsify symptoms, manipulate medications, then profit from insurance payouts when patients died in their private facility. The evidence mounted through the day. Financial records showed millions flowing through shell companies. Former hospital staff testified about suspicious transfers and sudden deaths. Family members of previous victims described identical patterns, loved ones with manageable conditions suddenly deteriorating after meeting Kent and being transferred to his friend's facility. They used their positions to identify targets. Jake Morrison testified, his pilot's precision evident in his detailed documentation. Every wealthy patient with good insurance became a potential victim. The flight records showed a clear pattern of emergency transfers to their private facility, always followed by death certificates citing natural causes. Sarah Chin's testimony proved devastating. Dr. Pratt used his department authority to override normal protocols. Mrs. Sheridan's donor relations position gave them access to patients' financial information. Together, they created a perfect killing system for profit. The most damaging testimony came from Dr. Michael Warren, a resident who had worked with Kent at his previous hospital. He blackmailed me too, just like Emma Sheridan. When I threatened to expose him, another resident who knew about the scheme committed suicide. They used that death to control the rest of us, claiming we'd be implicated if we spoke up. Through it all, Antonio sat ramrod straight in the gallery, watching his former wife's facade crack as each new piece of evidence emerged. When she finally took the stand in her own defense, her attempt at playing the victim fell apart under cross-examination. You expect us to believe you were unaware of these deaths? Hayes demanded. I was just doing my job. Lori's voice dripped contempt. Finding donors, building relationships. If some of them happened to die under Kent's care, that's hardly my. Yet you purchased property in Malibu 3 months before attempting to murder your husband, Hayes cut in. Property paid for with money traced directly to previous victims' insurance payouts. Antonio was a fool, Lori snapped, her mask finally slipping. So concerned with saving lives, he never saw the opportunity. Do you know what it's like being married to someone so blindly righteous? Kent understood ambition. He knew how to turn all those dying patients into something useful. The jury took less than 6 hours to reach a verdict. Kent stood arrogantly as the forewoman read the charges, his confidence crumbling with each guilty. 30 years for conspiracy to commit murder. 30 more for the deaths at previous hospitals. Additional decades for fraud, racketeering, and money laundering. Lori's sentencing came next. She remained coldly composed until the judge spoke. Your actions betray not just your marriage vows, but the fundamental trust between medical institutions and the public, he declared. You used your position to identify victims, exploited families at their most vulnerable, and attempted to murder your own husband for profit. 30 years seems insufficient, but it's the maximum I can impose. As they were led away, Lori turned to Antonio. I hope you're satisfied with your moral victory. Was it worth destroying everything we built? Antonio's response was calm, measured, and final. We built nothing. I saved lives while you plotted deaths. The only difference is now everyone knows exactly what you are. The aftermath brought changes. Emma testified about her coerced involvement in exchange for immunity. Her voice shook as she detailed how they'd exploited her addiction and threatened her career. I started using Adderall during intern year, she admitted to the court. Kent found out, offered to help keep it quiet. Then they started small, asking me to adjust medication orders, sign off on chart changes. When I realized what was happening to the patients, they threatened to expose my drug history, said I was already implicated, would lose my medical license. The judge recommended minimum immunity requirements in exchange for her cooperation. Within a week, Emma transferred to Chicago's trauma unit. Her goodbye with Antonio was brief, professional. She left a letter he filed away unopened in his desk, marked simply past complications. Later, cameras caught Kent's private facility being raided, his medical school friend led away in handcuffs. The forensic audit revealed dozens of suspicious deaths, each following the same pattern. Wealthy patients transferred in, massive insurance payouts transferred out. They found offshore accounts totaling millions, Sarachin reported, reviewing the final case files in Antonio's office. Every victim's insurance payout, every property deal, all perfectly documented by their own greed. And the Malibu property? Antonio asked, though he already knew. Seized along with everything else. The federal prosecutor is arranging for proceeds to go to the victims' families. Antonio nodded, satisfied. Justice had its own kind of precision, not unlike the medical calculations he made every day in the air. The correct diagnosis, the proper treatment, the right outcome. It all came down to paying attention to details. Weeks passed. The media circus faded. Antonio returned to his trauma flights, the familiar thrum of helicopter blades drowning out courtroom echoes. Each mission reminded him why he'd chosen this path. Not for profit or power, but for the fundamental duty to preserve life. The letters from Emma arrived monthly, postmarked from Chicago. Each one went unopened into the desk box labeled past complications. Some wounds needed time before examination, and Antonio had learned that timing was everything, in medicine, in justice, and in healing. Sarachin transitioned out of hospital administration but continued working with oversight committees, using lessons from the case to protect other institutions. Together, they turned their experience into reform, establishing protocols to catch similar schemes before they claimed more victims. Jake remained his steady partner in the air, their wordless understanding strengthened by shared battle scars. They never discussed the trial, but their flight logs became even more detailed, every decision documented with meticulous care. Antonio's legitimate insurance payout could have bought beachfront property in any exclusive neighborhood. Instead, he chose a modest house on Oregon's quiet coast, far from Malibu's pretension. The view wasn't as spectacular, but it was honest, like the work that paid for it. In the end, the biggest change wasn't in policies or procedures. It was in perspective. Every Thursday evening, after his last flight shift, Antonio would take a moment to watch the sunset from 2,000 feet. From that height, the line between light and shadow was crystal clear. He'd learned that some people chose the shadows, turning medicine's healing purpose into a weapon for profit. His job wasn't to understand them or to regret their choices. His job was to recognize the darkness when it appeared, stand against it without flinching, and always fly toward the light of dawn. The helicopter's radio crackled. Another emergency, another life hanging in balance. Antonio pushed memories aside, focusing on the coordinates with professional precision. The past had its place, filed away in courthouse records and desk drawers. The future waited in the next rescue, the next flight, the next chance to prove that even in medicine's darkest corners, there were still those who remembered their fundamental oath. First, do no harm. And for Antonio Sheridan, that was enough. Epilogue. 5 years later. The federal maximum security prison's visitor room remained as austere as the day Lori Sheridan first entered it. 5 years into her 30-year sentence, the former donor relations director's designer confidence had eroded into institutional monotony. Her orange jumpsuit hung loose on her frame, expensive highlights grown out to reveal steel gray roots. The guard's voice echoed. Visitor for Sheridan. Sarah Chun sat across the table, official paperwork in hand. Your appeal was denied. Again. Get out. Lori's voice had lost its smooth, manipulative edge, replaced by bitter harshness. You'll want to hear this, Sarah continued, unmoved. The feds found another offshore account. The victims' families are getting those funds too. That beach house you dreamed of? They're turning it into a recovery center for medical professionals dealing with ethical pressures. Lori's hands clenched. Still playing the righteous administrator? How's my ex-husband's little reform crusade going? Antonio's foundation has exposed 4 more schemes like yours. Interesting pattern, doctors and administrators working together, targeting wealthy patients. Sound familiar? Sarah's smile was professional, pointed. Your case study is now required reading in medical ethics courses. 3 cells down, Kent Pratt's fall from grace had been even more dramatic. The former surgeon spent 23 hours a day in isolation. Other inmates had their own code about doctors who killed for profit. His medical license was permanently revoked, his academic papers retracted, his name becoming synonymous with healthcare fraud. His latest appeal had included a rambling manifesto claiming conspiracy. The judge's response was brief. Petition denied. Kent's former medical school friend, serving 20 years for his role in the private facility deaths, had turned state's evidence, providing details of even more victims. Meanwhile, Seattle Grace Hospital had transformed. Antonio's trauma flight program now included intensive ethics training. Every new flight nurse learned not just medical procedures, but warning signs of institutional corruption. Your primary duty is to your patients, he told each class, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Politics, profit, pressure. None of that matters at 2,000 feet with a life in your hands. Jake Morrison, still his pilot after 25 years, would add his own lessons. Document everything. Trust your instincts. And if something feels wrong, it probably is. Their partnership had become legendary in emergency response circles. Each flight logged with military precision, every decision documented, creating an unbreakable chain of accountability. Sarah Chin's retirement from hospital administration hadn't slowed her down. The foundation she and Antonio started had grown into a national watchdog organization. They provided anonymous reporting systems, legal support, and protection for medical professionals facing ethical dilemmas. We lost 2 residents to suicide because they felt trapped, she reminded oversight committees. That never happens again. Emma found her own path to redemption in Chicago. Rising to chief resident, she channeled her experience into protecting new doctors from similar exploitation. Her trauma unit became known for both medical excellence and ethical integrity. Her monthly letters to Antonio continued, still filed unopened in his desk, but recently, he'd moved them to a new box labeled Future Considerations. Some wounds healed enough to examine, given time. The Oregon Coast House proved perfect for Antonio's needs. Close enough to his flight duties, far enough from painful memories. On clear evenings, he'd watch the sunset from his deck, the same time he used to view it from the helicopter. The final ironies proved fitting. Lori's carefully hidden funds now supported whistleblower programs. Kent's private facility became a treatment center for impaired medical professionals. Their elaborate scheme to profit from death instead strengthened protections for life. Prison reports showed their true characters. Lori attempted to manipulate other inmates, only to find her tactics useless in a world where designer smiles meant nothing. Kent's arrogance crumbled into paranoid isolation, his surgeon's hands now used only to write failed appeals. They aged separately, similarly. Each court rejection, each seized asset, each new revelation of their crimes stripped away more of their carefully constructed facades. The beautiful socialite and ambitious surgeon reduced to cautionary tales and medical ethics lectures. Their victims' families found different forms of closure. Some used the recovered funds for medical scholarships. Others established patient advocacy programs. All ensured their loved ones' deaths served to protect future patients. Antonio's foundation grew beyond its origins. They trained hospital staff to recognize warning signs, provided legal resources for ethical challenges, and maintained a database of suspicious patterns in patient care. The system only works if we protect those who protect patients, he would tell medical boards. His testimony helped pass legislation strengthening whistleblower protections in healthcare. Jake still flew their regular routes, their weekly sunset flights now a tradition. They'd added a third seat for training new flight nurses, passing on lessons learned at terrible cost. Sarachin's oversight committees expanded nationally. Corruption thrives in shadows, she testified before medical boards. Our job is to keep the lights on. Emma's trauma unit in Chicago became a model program, combining intensive medical training with ethical leadership. Her residents learned early that moral courage was as vital as medical skill. The desk box of her letters remained ready. When the time came to open them, Antonio knew the conversations would be about future healing, not past wounds. The final word came through official channels. Lori and Kent's last appeal had been rejected. The court's language was unmistakable. They would serve every day of their 30 years. In his Oregon home, Antonio filed the notice without comment. Tomorrow would bring new flights, new patients, new chances to prove that medicine's highest purpose remained unchanged. To heal, to protect, to serve life rather than profit from death. The helicopter waited on its pad, blades ready to turn, Jake checking the pre-flight list with characteristic precision. Another trauma call, another life hanging in balance. Some chose darkness, others chose light. Antonio Sheridan had always known which way to fly.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world are you watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The corner office on the 37th floor of Meridian Technologies headquarters offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, but Clinton McMullen barely noticed it anymore. His attention was fixed on the quarterly operations report displayed on his dual monitors, fingers dancing across the keyboard as he refined the presentation for tomorrow's board meeting. A gentle knock interrupted his concentration. Mr. McMullen? Sarachin, his executive assistant for the past 5 years, stood in the doorway. Her usually composed expression carried a hint of discomfort. Do you have a moment? Clinton gestured for her to enter, noting the slight hesitation in her step. Sarah had proven herself invaluable over the years, efficient, discreet, and most importantly, honest. The uncertainty in her bearing was unusual. What's on your mind, Sarah? She closed the door behind her, another warning sign. Sir, I'm not sure if I should mention this, but given how long we've worked together. She took a deep breath. I saw Mrs. McMullen yesterday at the Grand Somerset Hotel. Clinton's fingers stilled over the keyboard. The Somerset? Tanya's in Oregon visiting her mother. I know, sir. That's why I felt I should. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. She was with a man. They seemed intimate. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Clinton maintained his composed exterior, even as his mind began cataloging details. Tanya had left for Oregon 3 days ago, claiming her mother had taken a bad fall. The same mother who had called their home phone yesterday, asking to speak with Tanya about an upcoming family reunion. Did you recognize the man? Yes, sir. It was Gregory Walsh, from Helix Pharmaceuticals. He's attended several of our charity galas. Clinton remembered Walsh, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of artificial charm that came from too many corporate networking events. He'd noticed the man's lingering looks at Tanya during the last Christmas gala, but had dismissed it as typical social pleasantries. "Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate your discretion in bringing this to me directly." After Sarah left, Clinton opened his browser and typed Gregory Walsh Helix Pharmaceuticals into the search bar. The results painted a picture. CEO of Helix's East Coast operations, divorced twice, known for aggressive corporate takeovers and equally aggressive pursuit of younger women. At 57, he was 12 years Clinton's senior. Clinton's next call was to Marcus Blackwood at Sentinel Private Investigations. "Marcus? Clinton McMullen. I need your services, and I need absolute discretion. Always, Mr. McMullen. What are we looking at?" "I need surveillance on my wife, Tanya McMullen. Full coverage phone records, email, credit card statements, physical surveillance. I want to know everywhere she goes and everyone she meets." "Understood. Timeline. Start with the past 6 months, but be prepared to go back further." "And Marcus?" "I want particular attention paid to her interactions with Gregory Walsh from Helix Pharmaceuticals. We'll get started immediately. First report within 48 hours. Clinton ended the call and leaned back in his chair, his mind already constructing contingency plans. 20 years of marriage, built on what he'd thought was an unshakable foundation. He thought of the sacrifices, the 60-hour weeks, the missed vacations he'd taken to secure their position. The 5-bedroom house in Westbrook Hills hadn't come cheap, nor had Emma's private school tuition. Emma. His 15-year-old daughter's face flashed in his mind. She'd been distant lately, spending more time at friends' houses, offering one-word answers to his questions about school and activities. He'd attributed it to typical teenage behavior, but now? That evening, Clinton maintained their normal routine. He arrived home at 7, kissed Tanya hello, and asked about her mother's condition over dinner. "Mom's doing better," Tanya said, pushing her salmon around the plate. "The doctor says she just needs to be more careful about using her walker." Clinton watched his wife of 20 years lie to his face with practiced ease. Tanya had always been beautiful honey blonde hair, green eyes, the kind of figure that turned heads at charity galas. But now he noticed other details. The expensive new tennis bracelet she hadn't mentioned buying, the subtle checking of her phone under the table. "That's good to hear," he replied, taking another bite of salmon. "We should plan to visit her soon. As a family." A flicker of something anxiety crossed Tanya's face. "Oh, you know how busy work keeps you, dear. Besides, Emma has her school commitments." Emma, who had been silent throughout dinner, suddenly stood. "I need to finish my history project. May I be excused?" After dinner, Clinton waited until Tanya was absorbed in her book club group chat before climbing the stairs to Emma's room. The door was closed, pop music leaking through the expensive soundproofing he'd had installed last year. He knocked twice. "Come in." Emma sat cross-legged on her bed, textbooks spread around her. Her long dark hair, so different from either his brown or Tanya's blonde, was pulled back in a messy bun. She barely looked up from her phone. "How's the project coming along?" "Fine." Clinton surveyed the room, noting the new designer handbag on her desk chair. "That's a nice bag. Birthday gift?" "Oh, Mom got it for me, for getting good grades." The bag was a Chanel, worth at least $4,000. Not the kind of impulse purchase Tanya would make without discussing it with him first, even with their comfortable lifestyle. "I'm glad you're keeping your grades up." He paused at her desk, eyes catching on the leather-bound journal partially hidden under a geometry textbook. "Well, don't stay up too late." Later that night, after Tanya had gone to bed, Clinton returned to Emma's room. The journal was exactly where he'd seen it, its pages filled with his daughter's neat handwriting. May 15th. "Uncle Greg took Mom and me shopping today. He got me the Chanel bag I've been wanting forever. Mom says we can't tell Dad because he's weird about expensive gifts. I don't get why we have to keep hiding things. Uncle Greg makes Mom happy, way happier than Dad ever does. I wish she'd just tell Dad and end this pretense." June 3rd. Another business dinner with Mom and Uncle Greg. "He's already promised to buy me a car for my 16th birthday. Mom says we'll figure out how to explain it to Dad, but honestly, I'm tired of all the lies. Clinton closed the journal, his hands steady despite the rage building in his chest. His daughter, his little girl who used to wait by the door for him to come home from work, was complicit in her mother's affair. The next morning, Clinton called Marcus again. I need you to expand the investigation. I want everything you can find on Tanya's past. Go back to the beginning of our marriage. Marcus's first report arrived 3 days later, delivered in a plain manila envelope to Clinton's office. The contents were worse than he'd imagined. Gregory Walsh wasn't Tanya's first indiscretion. There had been others: David Cooper, a tennis instructor, in 2010, Michael Reeves, a neighbor's recently divorced brother, in 2013, and most damningly, James Martinez, her boss at the advertising firm where she'd worked, in 2001. The Martinez connection sent Clinton diving into old records. He remembered that period clearly. Tanya had taken a week-long business trip to Miami in March 2001, returning tanned and distant. 9 months later, Emma was born. Clinton accessed Meridian's medical database, pulling up the results from their annual health screenings. His own blood type was AB negative. Tanya's was O positive. Emma's blood type, listed in her emergency contact information, was B positive. A basic understanding of genetics was all it took. It was biologically impossible for him to be Emma's father. The revelation should have destroyed him. Instead, it brought clarity. Clinton McMullen had built Meridian's operations from regional success to national powerhouse through strategic thinking and careful planning. He would approach this betrayal with the same methodical precision. Over the next week, he gathered evidence. Marcus provided photographs of Tanya and Gregory at the Somerset, credit card statements showing matching charges at hotels and restaurants, email exchanges recovered from a secret account. The investigator also uncovered Gregory's pattern: pursuing wealthy married women, lavishing them with gifts, then discarding them once the excitement faded. Clinton's lawyer, Richard Sterling, reviewed the evidence with a grim expression. "This is comprehensive," Richard said, closing the thick folder. "With this documentation, you could take her for everything in the divorce." "That's not my goal." Clinton's voice was calm. "I want to disappear." "Disappear?" "Meridian is opening the new Seattle division. I'll take the transfer, leave the house, the cars, most of the assets. But I want the divorce papers served after I'm gone, along with proof of her infidelity." Richard frowned. "Clinton, you have the upper hand here. Why give her an easy out?" "Because I want her to live with what she's done. Let her explain to our friends, to Emma, to her precious Gregory, why her husband abandoned everything." Clinton's smile held no warmth. "But don't include Emma's paternity in the evidence. That's my last gift to the daughter I raised." The plan came together with military precision. Clinton accepted the Seattle position, citing the career opportunity. He arranged for the movers, updated his will, and transferred funds to new accounts. Throughout it all, he maintained his routine, playing the role of devoted husband and father. The night before his departure, he sat through another family dinner, listening to Tanya's plans for redecorating the living room and Emma's complaints about her calculus teacher. "I'll miss you both," Tanya said, reaching for his hand across the table. "But we'll visit all the time. Won't we, Emma?" Emma nodded, already reaching for her phone. "Sure, Dad. Seattle's supposed to be cool." Clinton squeezed Tanya's hand, noting the tennis bracelet Gregory's gift glinting on her wrist. "I'm sure you'll both be just fine." He left before dawn the next morning, leaving 2 envelopes on the kitchen counter. The first contained divorce papers. The second held copies of photographs, hotel receipts, and email exchanges, along with a simple note. "Tanya, 20 years of marriage, and you couldn't even be honest about visiting your mother. I know about Gregory, and David, and Michael. I know about the shopping trips, the lies, the way you've turned our daughter into your accomplice. You can keep the house, the cars, the life I built for you. Consider it payment for teaching me the true value of loyalty. Clinton." 3 days later, as Clinton settled into his Seattle office, Richard called. "She's making accusations," the lawyer reported. "Claims you've been embezzling from Meridian, that you've left them destitute. She's playing the victim masterfully. Several of your neighbors have already offered to help her financially. And Emma? She's supporting her mother's story. posted quite a rant on Instagram about her father being a thief and a coward. Clinton watched his office window, thinking of all the bedtime stories, school plays, and father-daughter dances. Send me the documentation showing all assets were legally obtained and properly declared. Make sure the board has copies as well. What about Emma's posts? Want me to have them taken down?
No.
Clinton's reflection stared back at him, shoulders straight, jaw set. Let them tell their stories. The truth has a way of surviving lies. He ended the call and turned to his computer, where Meridian's West Coast expansion plans awaited his attention. In the end, Tanya had given him something valuable, freedom from illusions. He had built one successful life from nothing. He could do it again. Seattle, 2017. Clinton McMullen's new office at Meridian Technologies' Seattle headquarters. The space was smaller than his previous corner office in New York, but the view of Puget Sound held its own stark beauty. 6 months had passed since his calculated exit, and the West Coast Division was already exceeding projections under his leadership. Marcus Blackwood's weekly report sat open on his laptop. Subject T continues to maintain her victim narrative. Social circles largely sympathetic. Country club membership retained through Walsh's influence. Subject appears to be liquidating personal assets despite maintaining lifestyle. Walsh seen with multiple female companions at various events, though presents publicly with Subject. Subject E graduated high school with honors. Accepted to NYU marketing program. Social media presence continues to paint negative picture of client. Latest post, attached, claims financial abuse and controlling behavior during childhood. Clinton closed the report, his expression unchanged. He'd expected nothing less from Tanya. She'd always excelled at manipulating narratives to her advantage. The country club membership didn't surprise him either. Gregory Walsh collected trophy women like some men collected cars, and Tanya was still attractive enough to be useful at corporate events. His intercom buzzed. Mr. McMullen? The Q3 operations review is starting in 5 minutes. Thank you, Jennifer. His new assistant was pure efficiency, without Sarah Chin's personal touch. But that suited him now. Personal connections had proven to be liabilities. The operations review showcased the results of Clinton's focused leadership. West Coast revenues up 32%, operating costs down 18%, 3 new strategic partnerships secured. The board members attended virtually, their faces on the conference room screen showing increasing approval as he detailed his plans for expansion into emerging tech markets. Impressive work, Clinton, said Howard Thorne, board chairman. Very different from the East Coast Division's recent challenges. Clinton allowed himself a small smile. He'd heard about Meridian's New York operations struggling since his departure. Gregory Walsh's attempts to leverage Tanya's accusations had backfired when the board received Clinton's meticulously documented financial records. Thank you, Howard. I believe in letting results speak for themselves. After the meeting, Clinton reviewed another email from Richard Sterling. Tanya's lawyer is pushing for additional asset discovery. Claims there must be hidden accounts based on your sudden lifestyle change. I've provided documentation showing all assets were properly declared in the divorce. Walsh's involvement is becoming more obvious seeing his usual aggressive tactics. On a related note, Emma's social media campaign has gained traction in certain circles. Several news outlets have reached out for comment on the allegations of financial manipulation and abandonment. How would you like to proceed? Clinton's response was brief. No comment. Forward any media inquiries to Meridian's PR department. Continue monitoring Walsh's involvement. Year 2019. The Seattle Division's success had exceeded even Clinton's expectations. His promotion to executive vice president came with a corner office on the top floor and a clear path to CEO. He maintained his routine, 14-hour workdays, healthy meals delivered to his office, regular gym sessions at 5 a.m. His body was leaner now, hardened by purpose rather than mere discipline. Marcus's quarterly report brought unexpected news. Walsh's involvement with Subject T appears strained. Multiple witnesses report public arguments at social events. Subject's attempts to secure position on Helix Pharmaceuticals' charitable board rejected. Walsh seen regularly with Jessica Chin, 28, junior executive at rival firm. Subject T graduating NYU next month. currently interning at Walsh's company. Relationship with subject T shows signs of tension, multiple social media posts deleted, fewer public appearances together. Clinton archived the report without comment. He'd expected Walsh to discard Tanya, eventually men like him always did. The timing coincided with Tanya's 45th birthday, and Walsh had never kept a woman past a certain age, as his divorce records indicated. That evening, during his usual review of company operations, Clinton noticed an irregular pattern in the East Coast pharmaceutical accounts. A deeper dive revealed attempted probes of Meridian's security systems, originating from Helix Pharmaceuticals network. He called Richard. "I need a discrete audit of all interactions between Meridian and Helix over the past 3 years. Focus on Gregory Walsh's division. You think he's planning something?" Walsh never accepts defeat gracefully, and he's running out of ways to maintain his lifestyle. Helix's stock has dropped 40% since the failed merger with Princeton Biotech. The audit revealed what Clinton had suspected. Walsh was laying groundwork for a hostile takeover attempt. The man had always overestimated his own cleverness. Clinton prepared countermeasures methodically. Every questionable transaction, every attempted system breach, every corporate espionage attempt was documented and time-stamped. He added the files to his growing collection of evidence against Walsh, an insurance policy that was becoming more valuable by the day. Year 2021. Clinton's promotion to CEO of West Coast Operations came with a profile in Seattle Business Monthly. The photographer caught him at his desk, Seattle skyline behind him, his expression focused and unyielding. The article praised his revolutionary approach to corporate efficiency and sterling reputation for ethical leadership. The same week, Emma graduated from NYU. Clinton watched the ceremony through the live stream, noting how she'd grown to resemble James Martinez, same strong jaw, same dark eyes. She'd gained Tanya's gift for public performance, beaming for photos with her mother while accepting the diploma Clinton's alimony had paid for. Marcus's report arrived with pictures. Emma starting her job at a prestigious New York marketing firm, Tanya alone at charity events previously attended with Walsh, Walsh with his new girlfriend at the mayor's ball. Subject T attempting to maintain social position without Walsh's support. Multiple credit cards declined at high-end retailers. Mortgage refinancing application rejected. Subject E's social media posts about client decreased, but continue to reference recovering from toxic childhood. Walsh's company showing signs of financial distress. 3 board members resigned last quarter. SEC investigating irregular trading patterns. Clinton forwarded the report to Richard with one question. Time to apply pressure? The lawyer's response was immediate. Not yet. Let them dig deeper. Year 2023. The Seattle weather matched Clinton's mood as he reviewed the morning briefings. Meridian's West Coast division had just acquired their biggest competitor, cementing their market dominance. The board was discussing expanding his role to global operations. Jennifer's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. McMullen, there's a young woman here insisting on seeing you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says she's your daughter." Clinton pressed the button. "How long has she been waiting?" "About 20 minutes. Should I call security?" He checked the security feed on his laptop. Emma stood in the reception area, designer clothes less polished than her social media posts suggested, hands clutching an oversized bag. 8 years had aged her from teenager to adult, but her posture still showed Tanya's influenced, practiced grace masking desperation. "Send her in." Emma burst through the door, her composed facade cracking. "How dare you ignore my messages? Do you know what we've been through because of you?" Clinton observed her calmly. "Close the door if you're planning to continue shouting." She slammed it shut. "Mom is sick. She has cancer. We can't afford the treatments because you cleaned out all the accounts when you ran away. And now I'm supposed to be planning my wedding, but we can barely make rent." "Sit down, Emma. Don't you dare act all corporate and cold. You abandoned us. You destroyed our lives because you couldn't handle Mom being happy with someone else." Clinton opened his desk drawer and removed a thick folder, its contents organized with characteristic precision. "Before you continue this performance, you should know who you're really asking for help." He laid out the photos first. Tanya with Walsh at the Somerset, timestamps proving her Oregon trips were lies. Credit card statements showing thousands spent on hotels and gifts. Email exchanges planning their future together. Your mother's happiness wasn't my concern, Clinton said, his voice level. Her honesty was. Emma's face paled as he continued laying out documents. Stop it. I don't want to see. But you should see. You've spent 8 years spreading lies about financial abuse. Here are the alimony payments. He placed bank statements on the desk. Here are the tuition payments for NYU. Here are the credit card statements showing your mother's spending after I left. Uncle Greg helped us when you abandoned. Gregory Walsh? Clinton's laugh held no humor. Let's discuss your Uncle Greg. More documents appeared. Walsh's involvement with 6 other married women, his pattern of discarding them when they aged or became inconvenient. Financial records showing his company's desperate attempts to stay afloat. He dropped your mother when she turned 45, just like he dropped his previous mistresses. Just like he'll drop his current girlfriend when she gets too old or too expensive. Emma's hands shook as she picked up a photo of Walsh with his new girlfriend. He said he had to focus on business. He focused on replacing your mother with someone younger. Just like he helped her replace me. Clinton's voice remained steady. But that's not the interesting part. The final documents detailed Walsh and Tanya's plan to force Clinton out of Meridian through false accusations of fraud. Emails discussed using Emma's social media posts to support their narrative. They wanted my shares in the company. Your mother thought she'd end up with a wealthy CEO instead of a mere COO. Walsh needed Meridian's resources to save his failing company. You were their unwitting propaganda machine. Emma's face had lost all color. I didn't. I never knew. You never asked. You chose to believe what was convenient. Your mother said I was abusive, so you posted about trauma. She said I stole money, so you became her public witness. Did you ever wonder why I never defended myself? Why I let you destroy my reputation? I thought you were guilty. Clinton gathered the documents back into the folder. Your mother's cancer isn't my concern. Neither is your wedding. I gave you both exactly what you deserved. The freedom to live with your choices. Dad, please. Emma's voice cracked. I was just a kid. I believed what Mom told me. You're not a kid anymore. You're a marketing professional who used her skills to help destroy her father's reputation. Actions have consequences, Emma. It's time you faced yours. He pressed the intercom. Jennifer, please escort Ms. McMullen out. Dad, wait. There's something else you should know. Clinton raised his hand. You've said enough for one lifetime. As security led Emma from his office, Clinton returned to his work. That evening, Richard called with urgent news. Walsh tried to access the sealed records of your divorce. He's getting desperate. Helix's stock dropped another 30% today. Clinton said, send copies of everything to the SEC. All of it, the corporate espionage attempts, the irregular trading, the attempted fraud. Let's end this properly. It'll destroy him. Tanya too, by association. They built their lives on destroying others. Consider it karmic balance. After the call, Clinton worked late into the night, his reflection in the window growing sharper as darkness fell. 8 years ago, he'd left New York with nothing but his integrity and determination. Now he commanded the most successful division of Meridian Technologies, while those who betrayed him faced the consequences of their actions. The news of Tanya McMullen's affair and Gregory Walsh's corporate espionage broke like a thunderstorm across New York social circles. The SEC investigation into Helix Pharmaceuticals made headlines in the Wall Street Journal. Pharmaceutical executive faces federal probe over corporate espionage allegations. Emma's fiancé, David Chun, sat in their Manhattan apartment, scrolling through the evidence that had leaked to various news outlets. The photographs of Tanya with multiple men over the years. The emails plotting against Clinton McMullen. The corporate espionage attempts. You told me your father was an abusive man who stole from his company, David said, his voice flat. You said he drove your mother into poverty. Emma stared at her engagement ring 3 carats, chosen to match her carefully crafted image of success. David, I can explain. Explain what? That you helped destroy an innocent man's reputation? That your mother was the one having affairs? He stood up, pacing their expensive living room. My family values integrity above everything, Emma. We're traditional people. This This isn't something I can ignore. Please, just let me. The wedding's off. David pulled off his ring. My mother was right about you. The way you constantly posted about your father, turning yourself into a victim. She said anyone that obsessed with destroying someone else must be hiding something. After David left, Emma logged into her social media accounts. Her carefully curated narrative of surviving financial abuse had gained her thousands of followers and even speaking engagements at women's empowerment events. Now those same followers were sharing news articles about the SEC investigation, questioning everything she claimed. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boss. We need to talk about your position with the firm. Your social media presence has become problematic for our brand. In Connecticut, James Martinez watched the news from his corner office at Global Innovations. His secretary buzzed in. Sir, there's a young woman named Emma McMullen insisting on seeing you. She says it's about a DNA test. Martinez's hand tightened on his desk. He'd built his life carefully after leaving the advertising world CEO position, political connections, philanthropic image. A paternity scandal would destroy everything. Tell her I'm in meetings all day. And Jennifer? That name shouldn't appear in my calendar again. He called his lawyer immediately. I need ironclad deniability, whatever it costs. Tanya sat in her oncologist's office, the latest scan results on the screen behind her. The cancer had responded to treatment, but the bills had devastated her finances. Gregory's promises of support had vanished along with his social standing. Mrs. McMullen, Dr. Patterson said, we need to discuss payment arrangements for your continuing care. I told you, Gregory Walsh will be handling. Mr. Walsh's office has informed us they're no longer covering your treatment costs. Tanya's carefully maintained composure cracked. That's impossible. He promised. Perhaps you should explore other options. There are payment plans. I'll call some friends, Tanya said, reaching for her phone. But the messages she sent went unanswered. Her social circle, once so eager to support the victim of Clinton McMullen's supposed financial abuse, had seen the evidence of her affairs. The photos, the emails, the plots against her husband. Victoria Ashworth, her closest confidant, sent back one message. Please don't contact me again. My husband sits on 3 corporate boards. We can't be associated with this scandal. At Helix Pharmaceuticals, Gregory Walsh faced the board of directors. The SEC investigation had uncovered everything: the corporate espionage, the irregular trading, the attempts to manipulate Meridian's stock. The company's reputation is in tatters, board chairman Phillips said. Our stock has dropped 60%. 3 major partners have withdrawn from drug trials. I can explain, Walsh started. Save it for the federal investigators. Phillips slid a document across the table. Resign now, or we'll vote you out and cooperate fully with the SEC. Walsh's arrogance finally cracked. You can't do this to me. I built this company. No, Gregory, you destroyed it. Just like you destroyed everything else you touched. Emma sat in her therapist's office, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. Dr. Sarah Bennett waited patiently as she spoke. I believed every lie she told me, Emma said. About Dad being controlling. About him stealing money. I wanted to hurt him the way I thought he'd hurt us. She wiped her eyes. But he was the only one who never lied. What do you plan to do now? Emma pulled out a journal, leather-bound, like the one her father had found years ago. I'm writing everything down. The truth this time. About Mom's affairs. About Uncle Greg's manipulation. About how I helped them destroy an innocent man's life. And then, I'm sending it to my father. He deserves to know I finally understand what I did. Clinton sat in his Seattle office, now adorned with awards from his successful leadership of Meridian's West Coast division. The board meeting had just ended. They'd unanimously voted him as global CEO. Rachel, his wife of 6 months, brought him coffee. They'd met at a technology conference where she challenged his views on AI implementation. Her intelligence and direct manner had caught his attention. Her integrity had won his trust. The SEC just announced formal charges against Walsh, she said, sitting across from him. The evidence you provided was decisive. Clinton nodded. The manila envelope containing Emma's therapy journals sat unopened on his desk. Are you going to read it? Rachel asked. Eventually. He turned to the window. Some things need time to settle. She's trying to make amends. Amends require more than words, Rachel. They require accepting consequences. His phone buzzed another wedding invitation from Emma. The ceremony would be small, she wrote. No publicity. No social media. Just truth and humility. Clinton marked it, returned to cinder, without opening it. Some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt. They served better as reminders of why we stopped crossing them. The Seattle Times ran a profile on Clinton McMullen, newly appointed global CEO of Meridian Technologies. The article praised his unwavering integrity and strategic brilliance in exposing corporate espionage while building the company's most successful division. In a small apartment in Boston, Emma read the article. Her marketing career was over. No firm would touch her after the scandal. She worked as a junior copywriter now, starting over with hard-earned humility. Her phone showed a news alert. Gregory Walsh had pleaded guilty to securities fraud. Another alert. James Martinez had stepped down from Global Innovations, citing personal reasons after Emma's paternity claims gained media attention. In Connecticut, Tanya lived in a rented condo, her luxury home sold to pay medical bills. The cancer was in remission, but her reputation would never recover. Her friends had abandoned her, her lover had betrayed her, and her daughter had learned the bitter taste of truth. Clinton stood at the window of his new office in Meridian's global headquarters. Rachel worked beside him, reviewing acquisition proposals. They built a partnership based on mutual respect and unwavering honesty. The board wants to know if you'll speak at the ethics conference, Rachel said. Your story about exposing corporate espionage has become a case study in business schools. Clinton smiled slightly. Sometimes the best lessons come from letting people face the consequences of their choices. Clinton McMullen had learned long ago that some stains weren't meant to be washed away. They were meant to remind us why we chose to walk away from the storm. On his desk, a new initiative awaited his signature. The Meridian Integrity Project, dedicated to exposing paternity fraud and corporate espionage. He'd turned his pain into purpose, his betrayal into a beacon for others. Clinton stood unmoved. He'd built his life twice now, first from nothing, then from betrayal. Each version stronger than the last, each choice vindicated by time and truth. Some called it revenge. Clinton called it justice. And justice, like karma, needed no explanation. Epilogue. The Manhattan social scene had long memories. At 60, Tanya McMullen Walsh lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Queens, far from her former Westbrook Hills mansion. Her carefully maintained beauty had faded, replaced by the harsh lines of someone who'd lost everything worth keeping. She sat alone at her kitchen table, reading the Wall Street Journal's latest profile on Clinton McMullen. Under his decade of leadership, Meridian Technologies had become a global powerhouse. The article praised his revolutionary approach to corporate integrity and the Meridian Integrity Project, which had exposed dozens of corporate fraud cases and supported countless victims of paternity fraud. Her phone buzzed another collection agency. The cancer treatments might have saved her life, but they destroyed her finances. Gregory Walsh's promise to cover her medical bills had vanished along with his fortune after the SEC investigation. He'd served 3 years in federal prison for securities fraud and corporate espionage. Now at 70, he lived in a retirement community in Florida, his empire reduced to Social Security checks and bitter memories. Tanya's former friends had made their choices clear. Victoria Ashworth, once her closest confidant, had written a tell-all book, The Art of Deception. My Years with a Social Climber. It had spent 6 weeks on the bestseller list, each page exposing another layer of Tanya's manipulations. Her phone rang again. Emma, calling from Boston. Mom, did you get the invitation to Jack's 5th birthday party? Tanya's grandson had her green eyes, but none of her deception. Emma had married Michael Crawford, an accountant who valued honesty above status. Their modest life was everything Tanya had once despised. I did, sweetheart, but I'm not sure. It's just family, Mom. Small gathering. Emma's voice held the careful tone of someone who'd learned to measure trust in teaspoons. Michael's parents will be there. His sister, Kate. The unspoken name hung between them. Clinton wouldn't be there. He'd maintained his position on reconciliation through the years. Emma had learned to respect his boundaries, understanding that some bridges couldn't be rebuilt with apologies alone. In Seattle, Clinton's office at Meridian's global headquarters offered a view of the city he'd made his own. At 65, his hair had gone steel gray, but his presence remained commanding. The Wall Street Journal article sat on his desk beside newer achievements: honorary doctorates, humanitarian awards, and pictures of his family with Rachel. Their twin daughters, Sarah and Lauren, had inherited their parents' sharp minds and unwavering principles. At 16, they were everything Emma could have been: honest, direct, and fiercely loyal. Rachel entered with their morning coffee ritual. 20 years of marriage had deepened their connection, each year adding layers of trust to their foundation. "The Integrity Project's latest report is ready for review," she said, sliding a tablet across his desk. "We've identified 3 new cases of corporate fraud and helped 20 families affected by paternity fraud last quarter." Clinton nodded, remembering the project's origins in his own pain. "How's the university partnership progressing?" "Harvard Business School wants to expand the case study program. Your stories become required reading in their ethics curriculum." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Karma does have a sense of education. His phone buzzed Marcus Blackwood's quarterly report on the past players in his life's drama. Gregory Walsh released from assisted living facility after second stroke. Medical bills depleted remaining assets. Now residing in state-funded care home in Tampa. James Martinez resigned from all board positions after paternity claims surfaced. Currently living in Portugal, avoiding U.S. media. Subject team maintains minimal lifestyle in Queens. Monthly medical bills exceed income. Attempts to publish memoir rejected by multiple publishers. Subject E continues copywriting work in Boston. Second child expected in December. Social media presence remains minimal, focused on family photos and children's activities. Clinton archived the report. He'd stopped reading them years ago for any emotional content. They were simply data points now, confirmation that choices had consequences. A reminder popped up on his calendar: Sarah and Lauren's science fair that evening. They developed a blockchain application for verifying corporate financial records, inspired by their father's work in corporate transparency. "The girls want to stop for ice cream after the fair," Rachel said, reading his schedule. Lauren mentioned that new place by the waterfront. Clinton smiled, a real one this time. "Let's make it dinner too. They deserve a proper celebration." In a Tampa nursing home, Gregory Walsh stared out his window at the Florida sun. Copies of old business magazines sat untouched on his bedside table, reminders of his former life as a corporate titan. His second stroke had left him partially paralyzed, dependent on state aid after his assets were drained by legal fees and settlements. His younger girlfriend had left when the money ran out. His children from previous marriages didn't visit. His reputation, once his most valuable asset, was now a cautionary tale in business ethics courses. A nurse brought his evening medication. "Mr. Walsh, you have a visitor." Victoria Ashworth stood in the doorway, recorder in hand. "Hello, Gregory. Ready to tell your side of the story?" He turned away. Even his part in Tanya's downfall had been taken from him, reduced to a chapter in someone else's expose. Emma sat in her home office in Boston, finishing an article for a small business newsletter. Her social media accounts, once filled with attacks on her father, now showed only her children's milestones and family moments. Jack played with his toys nearby while she rubbed her growing belly. The new baby, another boy, would carry the Crawford name. She'd learned to find peace in simple truths: love without manipulation, success without destruction. Michael came home from his accounting firm, kissing her cheek. "How are my favorite people?" "We're good. Mom called about Jack's party." He nodded, understanding the complexities. "And your father?" "Same as always." The twins sent pictures from their science fair, though. "They're brilliant, just like him." Emma had learned to appreciate her father's success from afar. His new family represented everything she'd helped destroy in her old one: trust, honesty, unconditional love. She opened her laptop, checking the Meridian Integrity Project's website. Her father's latest initiative had helped expose 3 major corporate fraud cases and provided support for dozens of families affected by paternity fraud. His pain had become purpose, his betrayal transformed into a legacy of truth. Clinton and Rachel hosted their annual employee appreciation dinner at their Seattle home. The twins entertained guests with stories from their coding projects while Rachel discussed the Integrity Project's university partnerships. Howard Thorne, now retired from Meridian's board, raised a toast. To Clinton McMullen, the man who turned betrayal into a billion-dollar lesson in corporate integrity, Clinton surveyed the room: his wife, his daughters, his legacy of truth. He'd built this life twice, once from nothing, then from betrayal. Each version stronger than the last, each choice vindicated by time. Later that night, after the guests had left, Clinton stood at his home office window. Rachel joined him, their reflections overlapping in the glass. "Emma sent pictures of Jack," she said softly, "and an ultrasound of the new baby." Clinton nodded. He kept a folder of these images, separate from business files and project reports. Not for reconciliation, some bridges served better as memories, but as reminders that truth had its own way of rebuilding what lies destroyed. "Sarah and Lauren want to expand the Integrity Project," Rachel continued. "They've designed an AI system to detect patterns of corporate fraud, like father, like daughters." Clinton smiled. Clinton McMullen had learned decades ago that some storms were meant to be weathered, not escaped. They carved new paths, revealed hidden strengths, and sometimes, if you stood firm enough, they washed away just enough of the past to let the future shine through. In Queens, Tanya stared at old photos of her former life. In Tampa, Gregory Walsh faced his legacy of destruction. In Boston, Emma raised her children on hard-earned wisdom. And in Seattle, Clinton McMullen stood with his true family, having turned life's hardest lesson into his greatest victory. Sometimes the best revenge isn't in destruction, but in rebuilding something stronger from the ruins. The rain kept falling, but Clinton had long since learned to dance in storms.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world are you watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the kitchen windows as James Mitchell mechanically went through his post-shift routine. 24 hours of back-to-back emergency calls had left him exhausted, but the cryptic message from Andrea's school principal had sent him rushing home instead of catching his usual recovery sleep at the station. "Fourth time this month," he muttered, checking his phone again. No response to his texts or calls. Andrea had never missed a day of teaching in 12 years. Her perfect attendance record was practically legendary at Roosevelt High. James's firefighter uniform still carried the acrid smell of smoke from their last call, a warehouse fire that had nearly gone critical. He would have changed, but something about the principal's tone had set off warning bells in his mind. 15 years on the job had taught him to trust those instincts. The house felt wrong. Andrea's car was in the driveway, but the usual sounds of NPR or her favorite classical music station were missing. Instead, a faint bass line pulsed from somewhere below. The basement door stood slightly open, warm air carrying up unfamiliar music. "Andrea?" James called out, his voice echoing in the empty kitchen. The basement lights were on, shadows moving across the sliver of light visible through the door gap. The music suddenly cut off. Footsteps creaked on the stairs, and James felt his world tilt sideways as two figures emerged from the basement. Andrea, her dark hair disheveled and lipstick smeared, followed by Matthew Reynolds, his best friend of 20 years and fellow firefighter. Well, Andrea drawled, her normally warm voice dripping with contempt. "Look who's home early. Done playing hero for the day?" James stared at Matthew's hand resting possessively on his wife's hip, the same hand they'd clasped in brotherhood countless times during rescues, the same friend who'd stood as his best man. "What's going on here?" James kept his voice steady, though his hands had unconsciously clenched into fists. Andrea's laugh held no trace of the woman he'd married. "Oh, don't act so shocked, loser. Did you really think I was happy playing the devoted wife while you ran off to save everyone else?" She leaned back against Matthew, who smirked with undisguised satisfaction. 5 years, she continued, clearly savoring each word. "Matthew and I have been meeting right here in your precious basement. All those renovations he helped with? We turned it into our little love nest while you were pulling your heroic double shifts. Matthew finally spoke, his familiar voice now twisted with mockery. Someone had to keep her satisfied, brother. You were always too busy with the job, weren't you? Missing dinners, holidays, anniversaries. A woman has needs. And now, Andrea's hand drifted to her stomach in a gesture that made James's blood run cold. We're going to have what you could never give me. A family. Her smile turned cruel. Oh, and don't bother running to tell Claire about this. Your precious friend's wife already caught us months ago. She knows we deserve each other. James stood perfectly still, his fire captain's training kicking in automatically. Assess. Control. Respond. His voice came out calm, almost detached. How long has Claire known? Long enough, Matthew shrugged. She's not as fragile as you think. Unlike you, she can handle the truth about what she married. The truth? James's laugh held no humor. That's rich coming from you, Matt. Real rich. Andrea's expression flickered for just a moment before hardening again. Don't try to play the victim here. You drove me to this with your constant absence. Your precious job always came first. Matthew actually makes time for me. Time to do what exactly? James's eyes swept over them both. Besides turning my basement into your personal brothel? Matthew took a threatening step forward. Watch your mouth, brother. You might be a hero at work, but this isn't your firehouse. No, James agreed quietly. It's my house. My basement. My wife. His gaze locked onto Andrea. At least for now. Andrea's sneer wavered slightly at his tone. What's that supposed to mean? It means, James said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm, that you both seem awfully confident for people with so much to lose. Before either could respond, James's phone buzzed. The display showed a 911 dispatch alert. Domestic disturbance reported at 1542 Oak Street, Reynolds residence. James looked up slowly, meeting Matthew's suddenly uncertain gaze. Trouble at home, brother? Alone in the kitchen, James moved with mechanical precision, years of emergency response training taking over. His mind compartmentalized the betrayal, focusing instead on patterns and evidence. He pulled out his laptop, accessing the department's scheduling system. The past year's shift records told a story. Every time James had been scheduled for a 24-hour rotation, Matthew had called in sick at least once during that period. The dates formed a damning pattern. Computers running slow today. Tom, their shift supervisor, had complained just last week. Matt's been reorganizing all the old scheduling files. Said he was helping streamline things. James opened his personal calendar, cross-referencing dates. The department fundraisers Andrea had organized, 6 in the past year alone. Matthew had volunteered to handle the treasury for each one, insisting his business degree made him perfect for the job. You're lucky to have such a dedicated wife, Chief Harrison had said at the last firefighters' ball. Andrea's raised more money than any previous coordinator. The basement renovation flickered through his memory. Matthew had spent weeks down there, insisting on doing the electrical work himself. Can't trust these modern contractors, he'd said. Besides, what are brothers for? James pulled up his home's electrical bills for the past year. The usage patterns showed suspicious spikes, far beyond what 2 people should consume. The basement's separate circuit, Matthew's idea, didn't register on the main panel readings. His phone chimed with a text from Claire, dated just 3 days ago. Dinner still on for Saturday? Can't believe our 15th anniversary party is next month. Andrea's been so helpful with the planning. Something cold settled in James's gut. If Claire had really caught them months ago, why was she still planning celebrations? Why keep up the pretense in private messages? The dispatch alert about the Reynolds residence kept flashing on his phone. James pulled up Matthew's personnel file, using his captain's access. 3 domestic disturbance calls in the past year, all mysteriously missing from the official record. The responding officers' names had been redacted. Computer issues, Matthew had explained during their last system upgrade. Had to clean up some corrupted files. You know how it is with these old systems. The pattern crystallized with brutal clarity. Not just the affair. Something bigger was happening. The fundraisers, the electrical work, the missing records. His phone buzzed again. Another 911 dispatch. Female victim at Reynolds residence requesting medical attention. Possible domestic assault. James grabbed his keys, his mind already mapping out next steps. If his suspicions were right, the affair was just the surface of a much darker truth. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, but James moved through it with practiced ease. He'd transported enough victims here to know the quiet corners, the places where privacy still existed. He found Claire Reynolds in one of those corners, hunched on an exam table. Her designer blouse, the one she'd worn proudly at last month's department dinner, was spattered with blood from her split lip. A bruise bloomed across her left cheekbone, already turning purple. "James." Her voice cracked as she looked up. "How did you?" "Got the dispatch call," he said quietly, pulling up a chair. "Want to tell me what happened?" Claire's hands trembled as she clutched a tissue. "I found receipts," she whispered. "Strange deposits in our joint account. When I asked Matthew about them," she gestured to her face. "First time." James kept his voice neutral, professional.
"No."
The words seemed to deflate her. "But he always said no one would believe me. That you'd never accept anything bad about your best friend." A bitter laugh escaped her. "He said the department would back him up. That he'd taken care of any incidents." James pulled out his phone, setting it to record. "Tell me everything, Claire. Start with when you actually found out about Andrea." Claire's head snapped up. "Andrea? What about?" Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Oh God, they told you I knew? That I was okay with it?" Fresh tears spilled. "James, I just found out today. The receipts, they had her name on them. When I confronted him." "That's when he hit you?" She nodded. "He said I couldn't prove anything, that he'd make sure any report disappeared, just like the others." Her voice hardened. "But he was wrong about one thing. I did keep proof." Claire reached into her purse with shaking hands, withdrawing a USB drive. Bank statements, text messages, photos of the other times he. She swallowed hard. "I was afraid no one would believe me without evidence." James pocketed the drive. "You did good, Claire. Real good." He stood, decision made. "I need to make some calls. You okay here for a minute?" She managed a weak smile. "The nurse said Detective Sarah Martinez is coming. She specializes in domestic cases." "Sarah's good people." James nodded. "She'll take care of you." In the hallway, James made 2 calls. The first to Internal Affairs, requesting an urgent review of all domestic incident reports involving Matthew Reynolds, with special attention to deleted or modified records. The second call went to Roosevelt High School Board. "This is Captain James Mitchell," he said calmly. "I need to discuss some irregularities in the fundraising accounts managed by Andrea Mitchell and Matthew Reynolds. Specifically, large discrepancies between reported donations and actual deposits." He ended the calls, staring at the phone for a long moment. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture far uglier than a simple affair. The basement electrical work, the missing funds, the corrupted records. Claire's voice echoed in his mind. "I did keep proof." James smiled grimly. It was time to see exactly what his wife and best friend had been hiding in his basement. Sometimes, he reflected, the best way to fight fire was to let it burn hot enough for everyone to see the truth in its light. James sat in his dimly lit home office at 3 a.m., surrounded by stacks of documents and 3 computer monitors. The digital records from Claire's USB drive had opened a Pandora's box of deception. Bank statements revealed a joint account under Matthew and Andrea's names with regular cash deposits, each coinciding perfectly with the fundraisers they'd organized. "Captain Mitchell?" Sarah Chin's voice crackled through his phone. The department's forensic accountant had been working through the night at his request. "Those fundraising records you sent? It's worse than we thought." "Much worse." 20 minutes later, James stood in Sarah's office at the station, watching as she pulled up spreadsheet after damning spreadsheet on her dual monitors. "See this pattern?" She highlighted a series of transactions. Every charity drive, every department fundraiser for the past 3 years. The reported totals never matched the actual deposits. "We're looking at nearly $200,000 in discrepancies, but that's just the surface." James leaned closer, his jaw tightening. "Explain." "The money moves through a series of shell accounts before landing here." Sarah pulled up another document. 5 different charitable foundations, all registered to vacant offices. Matthew set them up using his treasurer credentials. Each one received donations from the fundraisers before the money disappeared into offshore accounts. And no one caught this? Matthew was methodical. He'd submit final reports weeks late, claiming he needed time to reconcile cash donations. By then, everyone was focused on the next event. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard. But he got cocky, started taking bigger cuts, getting sloppy with the paperwork. James's phone buzzed, a text from Tom, the station's senior electrician. Cap, found something in the electrical plans. Power draw calculations for your basement are way off. This setup, it's designed for industrial-grade ventilation, temperature control, specialized lighting circuits. Classic indoor growing operations setup. Send me everything, James ordered, then turned back to Sarah. The basement renovation timeline? Sarah pulled up the permits. Filed 8 months ago. Electrical work signed off by... She paused, frowning. That's odd. Inspector's signature is smudged on all of them, but the authorization number matches 3 other inspections Matthew handled personally. Cross-reference those inspections with property records. Sarah's eyes widened as the results populated her screen. All commercial properties. All recently sold to the same holding company that keeps appearing in the charity accounts. James's phone rang. Detective Martinez from Narcotics. Captain, got those surveillance photos you asked for. Last 3 months of activity around Roosevelt High. You need to see this. The photos showed Andrea's car parked behind the school gym during various events, basketball games, parent-teacher conferences, fundraisers. In each image, different vehicles would appear, stay for exactly 7 minutes, then leave. Those license plates? Martinez continued. They match known associates of the Santiago illegal substance ring. Your wife's been using school events as cover for distribution. James felt cold rage building, but his voice remained steady. The basement wasn't just their love nest. They turned my home into a distribution hub. He dialed a number he'd kept for emergencies. Jack? Mitchell here. Remember that warehouse fire where you lost your whole surveillance operation? Time to call in that favor. I need your team. Off the books. Sarah looked up from her computer. Want me to alert internal affairs? Not yet. James's smile held no warmth. First, we document everything. Every transaction, every meeting, every fake inspection. Let them think they're still invisible. They used your reputation as cover, Sarah said softly. Your own home. James cut her off. They used everyone. The department, the school, Claire. All those kids at fundraisers. His expression hardened. Now we use their overconfidence against them. The Roosevelt High Personnel Office buzzed with quiet tension as Linda Martinez, head of HR, closed her office door. She'd worked at the school for 20 years, but her hands shook as she placed a thick file on her desk. This is difficult, Captain Mitchell. She pushed the file forward. Your wife's personnel records contained irregularities. When you requested the audit, we found things that didn't add up. James opened the file to find medical forms bearing his forged signature. According to these documents, his bout with smoke inhalation 2 years ago had left him permanently infertile, a convenient explanation for Andrea's suspicious pregnancy. She told everyone you refused fertility treatments, Linda explained, anger creeping into her voice. Said you were too focused on your career to consider alternatives. The staff took up collections for her private medical consultations. Even the students held bake sales. How much did they raise? Over $15,000 in the past year alone. Linda pulled out more papers. But the doctor she claimed to see, Dr. Samuel Richardson, doesn't exist. The clinic address leads to an abandoned strip mall. James's phone buzzed with updates from Jack's surveillance team. Multiple transactions observed during school events. Known dealers entering through gym entrance. A. Mitchell handling exchanges personally. M. Reynolds conducting building inspections immediately after each transaction. Linda wasn't finished. There's more. These permission slips for after-school activities? All forged. Parent signatures don't match our records. She's been using legitimate events as cover for something else. The fundraisers? Same pattern. Events scheduled strategically, always with restricted access areas. Matthew would conduct fire inspections the same day, claiming certain sections were off-limits for safety checks. James's phone rang. Claire's number. James. Her voice trembled. I found Matthew's old papers. Records from Colorado. She took a shaky breath. This isn't the first time. 3 years before we moved here, he had an affair with another firefighter's wife. They were caught stealing department funds. What happened? His chief gave him a choice: resign quietly or face charges. I believed him when he said it was a mistake. Claire's laugh held years of accumulated bitterness. I helped him start over here, convinced the chief to give him a second chance. God, I was such a fool. You weren't the fool, Claire. You were just another part of their cover. James closed the file on his desk. I need everything you found. Then pack a bag and go somewhere safe. Don't tell Matthew. Already gone. I'm at my sister's. Her voice steadied. I'm done protecting him. After seeing what they did to you, to everyone. No more. The wall of monitors in Jack's surveillance van painted a damning picture. Hidden cameras captured every angle of the sophisticated growing operation concealed behind the basement's false walls. Tom, reviewing the electrical schematics, shook his head in disgust. Brilliant setup in a sick way, he muttered. Use the renovation to mask everything. Extra power draw hidden in normal usage patterns. Ventilation disguised as home improvement. Even added a backup generator so power outages wouldn't kill the plants. James watched Andrea enter the basement on one screen. Her phone conversation picked up clearly by the hidden microphones. No, listen carefully, she snapped. Schedules changed. Too many parents hanging around for that fundraiser next week. We need to move everything before the audit. She paused. Fine. Tell them to meet at the usual spot behind the gym. Matthew's already doctored the inspection records. Another screen showed Matthew at Roosevelt High's loading dock, exchanging paperwork with a nervous-looking building supervisor. Money changed hands, disappearing into Matthew's jacket. Third falsified inspection this week, Jack noted. Buildings all match known distribution points. He's creating a paper trail showing they're unsafe for regular inspections. Perfect cover for restricted access, James agreed. Send everything to these contacts. He handed over a list of email addresses. School board, fire department internal affairs, DEA task force. Time it for maximum impact. Simultaneous notifications. The evidence mounted as they watched. Surveillance photos caught Andrea passing packages during school events, Matthew conducting rushed inspections of known illegal substance houses. Bank records revealed money flowing through charities into offshore accounts. One more thing, Tom called out, reviewing maintenance logs. These equipment checks Matthew signed off on? All fake. He's been certifying safety gear that's never been inspected. Probably pocketing the maintenance budget too. James stared at the wall of evidence, photos, documents, surveillance footage, financial records. Andrea and Matthew had woven a complex web of deception, using his reputation and position as cover for their operation. Send the maintenance logs directly to Chief Harrison, he ordered. Our brothers deserve to know who they've been trusting their lives to. The pieces formed a perfect trap. James studied the evidence before him, knowing that soon, very soon, all their carefully constructed lies would come crashing down. They'd played him for a fool, used his home, endangered his fellow firefighters, and corrupted a school system meant to protect children. Now they would learn the true cost of their betrayal. The time for gathering evidence was ending. Soon would come the reckoning, and James intended to ensure that not a single lie would survive the inferno of truth about to engulf them all. Roosevelt High's auditorium was packed for the monthly board meeting. The room hummed with parents' chatter, teachers lounging in their usual cliques. Andrea sat prominently in the front row, surrounded by her sympathetic supporters. Her hand rested protectively over her stomach as she whispered to Susan Parker, another English teacher who'd helped organize fundraisers for her supposed fertility treatments. Chief Harrison slipped quietly into the back row, followed by several senior firefighters who positioned themselves strategically around the room. Matthew lounged near the emergency exit, his uniform immaculate, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He winked at Andrea, their shared confidence still unshaken. Board President Richard Chen, a stern-faced former prosecutor, called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m. Before we address our regular agenda items, Captain James Mitchell has requested time to discuss concerns about our fundraising programs. Andrea's head snapped up, her practiced smile faltering as James approached the podium. He carried a simple leather briefcase, his movements measured and deliberate. Two men in dark suits entered through the side door, FBI agents, though nobody knew that yet. "Thank you, President Chun." James's voice filled the room without effort, years of command presence evident in every word. "I'm here to discuss the truth about what's really been happening with our school's charitable initiatives." The projector screen flickered to life behind him. This spreadsheet represents every fundraiser organized in the past 3 years. Green numbers show reported totals. Red numbers show actual deposits. Gasps rippled through the audience as six-figure discrepancies became apparent. $217,000, James continued, clicking through detailed financial records. That's how much disappeared into private accounts controlled by Andrea Mitchell and Matthew Reynolds. These accusations are outrageous. Andrea shot to her feet, playing to her audience. "I've dedicated my life to these kids while you played hero at the firehouse. Everyone here know." "Sit down, Mrs. Mitchell." President Chin's voice cracked like a whip. "Captain Mitchell has the floor. And I believe the FBI agents would prefer you remain seated." James clicked to the next slide's surveillance photos, showing Andrea's clandestine meetings behind the gym. Students walked past in the background, unwitting extras in her illegal substance operation. While parents believed they were supporting education, their children were being exposed to illegal substance trafficking. The room erupted. Susan Parker recoiled from Andrea as if burned. Matthew pushed off the wall, starting forward, but Chief Harrison's quiet command froze him mid-step. "Stay put, Reynolds." "That's an order." "The evidence has been independently verified," James continued over the chaos. Forensic accountants traced every dollar. Every transaction documented, every meeting recorded. He turned to address Andrea directly. "Would you like to explain to these parents how their donations funded your affair and illegal substance operation? Or should I detail how you use school events as distribution points?" Andrea's mask cracked. "You're lying. Matthew, do something." "About what exactly?" James's voice could have frozen fire. "The illegal substance operation you built in my basement? The falsified inspection reports covering your distribution network? Or maybe your creative storytelling about my fertility?" The school nurse stood up, fury twisting her normally kind face. "We raised over $20,000 for your fertility treatments. You said your husband refused to help." "A convenient lie," James cut in. "Like the non-existent Dr. Richardson she claimed to consult. My actual medical records show a temporary condition that resolved 2 years ago. Records I never signed, by the way. Those signatures were forged." Matthew finally spoke, his voice dripping familiar contempt. "You can't prove any of this. It's your word against ours, brother. And who's going to believe?" "I believe him." Claire's voice rang clear as she entered through the side door, case files in hand. A collective gasp went through the room at her still visible bruises. "I have proof of everything. The abuse, the previous affairs, the stolen funds from his last apartment in Colorado." Matthew's face contorted with rage. "You stupid bot. Choose your next words very carefully," Chief Harrison warned, standing. His next words fell like hammer blows. "The department's internal affairs unit is particularly interested in those falsified inspection reports, especially the ones covering buildings linked to known illegal substance dealers." The room had gone deathly quiet. Andrea's former supporters were physically edging away from her. Matthew's fellow firefighters stared at him with naked disgust. James opened his briefcase methodically. "I'm providing the board with complete documentation. Bank records, surveillance logs, witness statements, evidence of systematic theft from multiple charitable organizations." He turned to face the accused. "You used my reputation as a shield. Used this school as cover. Children for profit and personal gain." His smile was terrifying in its calmness. "Now you can explain it all to the federal agents. And to the DEA task force waiting outside." "This is ridiculous." Andrea tried one last time. "I'm pregnant." "You can't." About that, one of the FBI agents stepped forward. "We have some interesting lab results to discuss." The federal courthouse buzzed with tension as Andrea Mitchell faced sentencing. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced by prison orange, her carefully styled hair now limp and dull. Her attorney, a public defender since her assets were frozen, shuffled papers nervously. Federal prosecutor Sarah Martinez arranged her exhibits with practiced precision. The state calls Dr. Michael Chun, chief of obstetrics at Metro General. The distinguished physician took the stand, consulting his records. Mrs. Mitchell's pregnancy test results are conclusive. Conception occurred approximately 8 weeks ago, not during the claimed 5-year affair. Andrea's lawyer rose halfway. Objection. Relevance? Goes to pattern of deception, Your Honor. Martinez replied smoothly. The defendant used this pregnancy to manipulate sympathy, just as she used falsified medical claims to solicit fraudulent donations. Overruled. Judge Harriet Knowles had no patience for theatrics. She'd read the case files, seen the evidence of lives endangered for profit. From the gallery, James watched with Claire beside him. Matthew's separate trial would begin next week. His falsified inspection reports had triggered investigations across 3 states, revealing a pattern of compromised building safety stretching back years. Martinez methodically built her case. Bank statements showed systematic theft from multiple charities. Surveillance footage caught Andrea conducting substance transactions during school functions. Student witnesses confirmed study sessions that were cover for dealer meetings. The defendant didn't just steal money. Martinez addressed the jury. She stole trust. Trust from parents who believed their donations helped children. Trust from students who witnessed illegal substance deals disguised as tutoring. Trust from colleagues who raised thousands for fictional medical treatments. Andrea cracked under cross-examination. You don't understand. James was never there. Always playing hero while I suffer. Define suffering, Mrs. Mitchell. Martinez interrupted. Was it suffering to steal from children's fundraisers? Suffering to deal illegal substance on school grounds? Or was it suffering to lie about your husband's fertility to cover your affair? Matthew promised we'd be together. Andrea shrieked, her composure finally shattering completely. Once we had enough money. The courtroom doors opened. Federal marshals led in Matthew Reynolds, no longer in his proud uniform but prison coveralls. His eyes met Andrea's with cold calculation. The defendant, Matthew Reynolds, his lawyer announced, wishes to cooperate with the prosecution in exchange for sentencing consideration. Andrea's wail of betrayal echoed through the courthouse. You promised. After everything we did. Mrs. Mitchell, Judge Knowles warned, control yourself or you'll be removed. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Andrea sobbed. The baby isn't mine, Matthew stated flatly. DNA test confirms it. Not mine, not James's. His smile was cruel. Seems you were busy with more than just our operation, weren't you? The final betrayal silenced even Andrea's sobs. Her web of lies collapsed completely, leaving nothing but cold justice. 1 year later, James stood in his converted basement, now a state-of-the-art training facility for the fire department. The GROW operations infrastructure had been completely stripped out, the space reclaimed for legitimate use. Insurance had covered the renovation costs, turning a symbol of betrayal into one of redemption and brotherhood. Looking sharp, Cap, Tom commented, adjusting settings on new exercise equipment. Young firefighters worked out nearby, the space alive with purpose. Hard to believe what this place used to be. The department had emerged stronger from the scandal. Matthew's betrayal led to stricter oversight, renewed commitment to their oath. The Brotherhood learned that true loyalty meant accountability, not blind trust. Across town, Claire loaded the last boxes into her moving truck. Her nursing license would transfer easily to Seattle's Swedish Medical Center. The divorce settlement had given her everything. The judge cited Matthew's documented abuse and theft as justification. You didn't have to help with the move, she told James as he carried another box. Yes, I did. His response was simple but firm. You helped bring them down. Showed real courage. Sometimes courage is just being too tired to be afraid anymore. She managed a small smile. Heard about Andrea's appeal? Denied. Full sentence stands 15 years for illegal substance distribution near a school. James secured the box in the truck. Matthew's facing 20+ for the falsified inspections. Endangering firefighters and civilians doesn't play well with the parole board. The baby's paternity had become public record, one final twist that stripped away any remaining sympathy. Neither a loved child nor a symbol of their affair, just another lie in their tapestry of deception. James's office at the station held one reminder of the ordeal: his framed firefighter's oath. Loyalty, it began, not just to the job but to truth itself. The word held deeper meaning now, defined by courage to face hard truths rather than comfortable lies. The betrayal had cost him a marriage, tested his faith and friendship, but it hadn't broken him. Instead, it revealed strength he hadn't known. He possessed the ability to stand alone for truth, regardless of personal cost. "Captain," a young firefighter appeared in his doorway. "Got a call. Warehouse fire downtown." James grabbed his gear with practiced efficiency. Life continued. Emergencies still needed handling. People still needed saving. The past was sealed in court records and prison sentences, but the future belonged to those strong enough to face truth without flinching. He paused at his office door, glancing at one last photo from the evidence files: Andrea and Matthew being led away in handcuffs, their web of lies finally exposed to daylight. Sometimes, he reflected, the best revenge isn't elaborately planned. Sometimes it's as simple as letting truth have its day in court, watching as deception crumbles under its own weight. The station alarm blared. James headed for his truck, leaving the past behind. He had lives to save, a duty to fulfill, and a brotherhood that now understood the true meaning of loyalty. In the end, justice hadn't just been served, it had been earned, one piece of evidence at a time. Epilogue. 10 years later, the high-security women's correctional facility in Dublin, California looked especially stark under the morning sun. Andrea Mitchell, now inmate 47291, shuffled through her daily routine in the prison laundry. Her once perfectly manicured hands were rough from industrial detergents, her carefully maintained appearance long since surrendered to institutional monotony. "Mitchell, visitor." The guard's voice echoed through the facility. Andrea's heart leaped, then immediately sank. After 10 years, she still hoped, but it was never who she wanted it to be. Her parents had disowned her after the scandal. Her former colleagues never responded to her letters. Matthew hadn't contacted her since his testimony destroyed what remained of her life. The visitor's room held a familiar face: Susan Parker, her former teaching colleague. The years hadn't been kind to their relationship. "The board wanted me to inform you personally," Susan began without preamble. "Your teaching license has been permanently revoked." The appeal was denied. Andrea's shoulders slumped. She'd clung to hope of returning to teaching after her release in 5 years. "Susan, please. We were friends." Susan's laugh was bitter. "I helped raise money for your fake fertility treatments. My students' children I was responsible for were exposed to your substance operation. Do you know Tommy Martinez overdosed last year? His first exposure to a legal substance was during your tutoring sessions." Andrea's carefully maintained prison composure cracked. "I never sold directly to students. That wasn't part of." "Save it." Susan stood. "The board's decision is final. And Andrea, those recommendation letters you asked for? None of us will write them. None of us will help you teach anywhere, ever again." After Susan left, Andrea sat alone, reality crushing down. 20 years into her sentence, increased after multiple failed appeals, with no possibility of returning to her career. Her pregnancy had ended in miscarriage during her first year in prison. Stress and guilt, the doctors said. The father, it turned out, was a dealer from their distribution network, adding one final humiliation to her disgrace. Across the country, in a maximum security federal prison in Colorado, Matthew Reynolds faced his own daily hell. His cooperation with prosecutors had earned him a slightly reduced sentence, but his crimes against fellow firefighters had made him a marked man among inmates. Former first responders in prison were rare and rarely forgiven by the general population. "Reynolds." A guard banged his baton against the bars. "Your lawyer's here." The attorney looked uncomfortable in the prison meeting room. "It's about your latest appeal." The fire chief testified again. Between the falsified inspection reports and the equipment maintenance fraud, they're maintaining the enhanced sentencing. "You're not getting out early." Matthew's prison-aged face showed no surprise. His testimony against Andrea had earned him 5 years off his sentence, but he still faced another decade inside. His attempt to claim mental duress from Claire's emotional abuse had backfired spectacularly when she produced years of documented evidence to the contrary. "What about my pension?" His voice carried none of its former arrogance. "Forfeit." The department's decision was upheld. Given the lives endangered by your actions, the lawyer shuffled papers. The civil suits are also proceeding. Once you're released, any income you earn will be garnished for restitution. Matthew returned to his cell, where a photographed newspaper clipping mocked him from the wall. It showed James Mitchell receiving a commendation for reforming the department's inspection protocols. The Mitchell regulations were now standard across multiple states, ensuring no other corrupt inspector could endanger lives for profit. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Claire Reynolds, now Claire Bennett, reviewed patient charts in Swedish Medical Center's trauma unit. Her nursing career had flourished after leaving Matthew's shadow. She'd earned her nurse practitioner license, specializing in domestic violence cases. Dr. Bennett? Her new name and title still brought a smile. Your 3 o'clock domestic violence support group is ready. She turned her experience into purpose, helping other women escape abusive relationships. Her testimony at Matthew's trial had inspired a department-wide review of domestic violence responses among first responders, leading to stronger support systems and accountability measures. The ring of her phone interrupted her thoughts. The display showed James Mitchell's name. "Claire, remember that training program you proposed? The one teaching emergency personnel to recognize domestic violence among their colleagues? The National Board approved it. They want you to head the implementation." She smiled, remembering how far she'd come from the frightened woman in that emergency room. "I'll need a good fire captain to help with the first responder aspects." "Already volunteered," James replied. "Tom's handling the station while I help with training." Back in California, James Mitchell's fire station had become a model for departmental integrity. The training facility in his converted basement hosted regular sessions on ethics and accountability. The framed oath on his wall had gained companions' commendations for his role in reforming department policies, awards for the peer support program he'd established. "Captain," Tom's voice carried excitement. "They've approved the expansion. 3 more departments adopting the Mitchell regulations next month." James nodded, reviewing the proposal. His experience had sparked a national conversation about oversight in emergency services. The protocols he developed after Matthew's betrayal were becoming standard practice across the country. His phone buzzed a message from Detective Sarah Martinez, now heading the department's expanded Internal Affairs Division. Final report on the Roosevelt High reconstruction. All traces of their operation gone. New administrations doing great work. The school had recovered from Andrea's betrayal, though the scars remained. Her former students, now adults, still dealt with the impact of her actions. The betrayed trust, the shattered innocence, consequences that extended far beyond her prison sentence. James's new wife, Dr. Rachel Chin, Sarah's sister from forensic accounting, understood his dedication to reform. They'd met during the investigation, bonding over shared values of integrity and justice. Their twin daughters, now 5, were growing up understanding that true strength came from standing for truth. The Mitchell Integrity Foundation called, Rachel mentioned over dinner. They want you to keynote their law enforcement conference. Theme is trust and accountability in public service. James considered the invitation. The foundation, funded partly by recovered illegal substance money from Andrea and Matthew's operation, supported programs preventing corruption in public service. Their work had helped implement many of the reforms sparked by the case. Late that night, James stood in his basement gym, now a testament to redemption. Young firefighters trained here, learning not just physical skills but ethical principles. The truth about Andrea and Matthew's operation had nearly destroyed the department's reputation, but the reforms that followed made it stronger. A news alert caught his attention. Andrea's latest appeal denied. Matthew's restitution payments increased. Their betrayal had failed to break him, instead catalyzing changes that would prevent others from following their path. Claire's domestic violence programs were saving lives. The Mitchell regulations were protecting communities. Even the pain Andrea and Matthew caused had been transformed into positive change. Sometimes justice isn't just about punishment, James reflected. Sometimes it's about turning betrayal into betterment, using hard truths to forge stronger systems. The station alarm sounded another emergency, another chance to serve. As James headed for his truck, he passed the wall of photos in the station house. Images of his crew, his family, his reform department, and in the center, the firefighter's oath that had started it all. Loyalty. It still began. But now everyone understood loyalty not to individuals, but to truth and justice themselves. Behind bars, Andrea and Matthew lived with their choices, watching from prison as their victims transformed tragedy into triumph. Their betrayal had failed to destroy James Mitchell. Instead, it had revealed his true strength, not just surviving their deception, but using it to protect others from similar harm. In the end, their greatest punishment wasn't the prison sentences or lost careers. It was watching from the shadows as their victims built something better from the ashes of their betrayal. That, James knew, was justice's final victory. Not just punishment, but transformation. Not just consequences, but change. The night shift stretched ahead, full of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring more training, more reforms, more lives touched by the lessons learned from one detective's determination to face truth without flinching. And somewhere in their cells, Andrea and Matthew faced their own reflections, understanding too late that their betrayal had forged not a victim, but a catalyst for change that would outlast their bitterness. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just letting truth have its day in court. Sometimes it's using that truth to build something stronger than the lies that came before.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world are you watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The morning sun cast long shadows across Derek Newton's office as he reviewed the final calculations for the Harrison Bridge project. At 45, his salt and pepper hair and sharp features gave him an air of authority that matched his reputation. The wall behind his desk displayed numerous awards and certificates, testament to his ability to turn failing infrastructure projects into resounding successes. Mr. Newton? His assistant Sarah poked her head through the door. The board meeting starts in 5 minutes. Derek gathered his presentation materials with practiced efficiency. Thank you, Sarah. Has finance sent the updated projections? Just came in. I've added them to your slides. Sarah handed him a sleek tablet. And congratulations in advance. Word is, the promotion's already decided. He offered a measured smile. Let's not count our chickens just yet. The boardroom fell silent as Derek presented his findings. The Harrison Bridge project had been bleeding money for months before he took over. Now, his innovative redesign would save the city millions while improving structural integrity. Remarkable work, Derek, Chairman Phillips announced after the presentation. The board has unanimously decided to promote you to Senior Project Director, effective immediately. Handshakes and congratulations followed, but Derek's mind was already on his next challenge. Success wasn't a destination. It was a continuous journey of improvement. Back in his office, he called Amanda, his wife of 22 years. Derek, how did it go? Amanda's voice carried its usual enthusiasm. Got the promotion. Thinking of celebrating tonight at La Maison. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I have a client meeting that ran late. Rain check? Derek noted the background noise, music and chatter that didn't sound like her usual design studio. No problem. Everything okay there? Sounds busy. Just at a cafe going over some designs. Salvador's helping me with a new meditation room concept. You know how these creative meetings go. Salvador Knox, the yoga instructor Amanda had started seeing 6 months ago for her stress management. Derek had met him once, noticed the 2 white teeth and the way his eyes lingered on Amanda's figure. Of course, don't work too late. After hanging up, Derek pulled up their joint account statement. Another withdrawal, $5,000 marked as home renovation research. Curious choice of words for what should be a simple design consultation. The drive home took longer than usual, a throbbing migraine building behind his eyes. The house was quiet when he arrived, its modern architecture a testament to Amanda's design aesthetic. Family photos lined the hallway, their wedding day, Emma's high school graduation, family vacations that now felt like scenes from another life. He headed to his home office, the medication for his migraine stored in the desk drawer. The house's open floor plan carried voices clearly, specifically, his daughter Emma's voice from her bedroom upstairs. "No, Mia. My dad still has no clue. Mom's boyfriend even picks me up from school sometimes when he's in town." Derek's hand froze on the drawer handle. "Yeah, they're planning to move to California once Dad pays off my college. Mom says Salvador's got connections there." "I know, right? She says Dad's too boring, too predictable. At least Salvador takes her dancing." The medicine forgotten, Derek sat in the darkness of his office, his engineering mind already processing this new data. The variables aligned with disturbing clarity. Amanda's increased absences, the mysterious withdrawals, Emma's sudden interest in California medical schools despite Stanford's prestigious program being right there in Palo Alto. The next morning, Derek maintained his routine with practiced precision. Breakfast with Amanda, who chatted about her latest design project while checking her phone under the table. He noticed the small smile that played on her lips as she read her messages, the way she angled the screen away from him. "Greg called yesterday," Amanda mentioned casually. "The startup's doing well. That investment really helped them take off." Derek stirred his coffee. "Which investment was that?" "Oh, from those early investors he mentioned." Amanda waved dismissively. "He's hosting another business meeting today." "Such a responsible brother you have." Greg's business meetings, another piece of the puzzle. His brother had always been the family charmer, the one who could talk his way out of anything. Now it seemed he was talking his way into something far more insidious. At work, Derek accessed the company's contracted investigation firm's database. Raul Levy's profile stood out, former military intelligence, specialized in corporate espionage, known for discretion. Derek sent a carefully worded email requesting a meeting. That afternoon, in a coffee shop far from his usual haunts, Derek sat across from Levy, a compact man with watchful eyes. "Tell me about Salvador Knox," Derek said, sliding across an envelope containing his initial payment. Levy's investigation revealed the first layer of deception within days. Salvador Knox had never completed his yoga instructor certification. His real estate license had been revoked in 3 states for ethical violations. His pattern was consistent: identify wealthy women, preferably married, establish trust through wellness coaching, then slowly work his way into their lives and their bank accounts. "Your brother's startup," Levy reported, "received a significant investment 6 months ago. $300,000, routed through a shell company called Knox Enterprises." Derek's jaw tightened. The amount matched several large withdrawals from his and Amanda's joint account, withdrawals Amanda had insisted were for Emma's college fund. The neighborhood played its part in the deception. Derek watched through his home office window as Linda Carlson picked up Amanda for their book club, the same book club that met at different houses each week, yet never seemed to actually discuss books. The Wilders next door would wave cheerfully whenever Amanda left for her yoga sessions, their teenage son oddly well informed about Derek's work schedule. One evening, Derek followed the thread to its source. He parked outside Greg's startup offices long after business hours. Amanda's car was there, parked next to a sleek sports car he recognized as Salvador's. Through the glass front of the building, he could see them in Greg's office, Amanda laughing at something Salvador said, his hand resting possessively on her waist. Greg sat at his desk, playing with his phone, the perfect accomplice providing the perfect cover. Emma's role became clearer too. Derek reviewed her recent credit card statements, coffee shops near Salvador's apartment, Uber rides that coincided with Amanda's appointments. His daughter had become their unwitting accomplice, or perhaps not so unwitting. The betrayal crystallized one morning as Derek reviewed the documents Levy had gathered. Amanda's father, Judge Martin Reynolds, retired, had been advising her on divorce proceedings for months. Notes from their meetings detailed strategies to maximize her claims on Derek's assets, using his long work hours and emotional unavailability as leverage. Derek sat in his office, surrounded by the evidence of his family's betrayal, and began to plan. The engineer in him approached it like any other project. Identify the problems, analyze the variables, design the solution. The mounting pressure behind his eyes reminded him of the migraines that had plagued him lately, but he pushed through it. Pain was temporary. Revenge, when properly executed, was permanent. He started with Emma's college fund. A quick review confirmed his suspicions. Amanda had been systematically draining it, moving money through a series of accounts. The final semester's payment was due soon, after which they probably planned to empty what remained. The neighborhood's involvement ran deeper than he'd initially suspected. The Carlsons had received a loan from Amanda, $40,000 from Derek's money. The Wilders had a similar arrangement. Each family had their own secrets, their own reasons for helping maintain the FOD. Derek worked late into the night, documenting everything. Every transaction, every meeting, every lie. The engineer in him appreciated the elegance of their deception. How each piece supported the others, how the structure of their betrayal had been carefully built over months, perhaps years. But engineers knew better than anyone, every structure had its weak points. Every system could be dismantled. It was simply a matter of identifying the critical supports and removing them in the correct order. The office chair creaked as Derek leaned back, his eyes moving from document to document. Amanda's carefully crafted persona as the supportive wife. Salvador's manufactured image as a spiritual wellness guide. Emma's role as their unwitting accomplice. Greg's startup serving as their meeting ground and money laundering operation. All the pieces were in place. Now it was time to begin the real work. Through his office window, Derek watched the sun rise over the city. The Harrison Bridge project had taught him an important lesson. Sometimes, to save a structure, you had to let parts of it fall. The weak points, the compromised sections, they all had to go before you could rebuild something stronger. He picked up his phone and dialed Catherine Parsons, the city's most ruthless divorce attorney. Ms. Parsons? Derek Newton. I need your help with a rather complex dismantling project. The pieces were set, the calculations made. Now it was time to show his family the true price of betrayal. The scene unfolded like a well-rehearsed play at the Carlsons' dinner party that weekend. Amanda wore her favorite blue dress, the one Salvador had complimented during their first private yoga session. She worked the room with practiced charm, touching Derek's arm occasionally for show, all while exchanging knowing glances with their host, Linda Carlson. Derek, the Harrison Bridge project is fascinating, Tom Wilder said, swirling his whiskey. Must be keeping you busy at all hours. Very busy, Amanda interjected with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Some weeks I hardly see him at all. Derek noted how Salvador, standing across the room in designer jeans and a tight-fitting Henley, smirked at this comment. The yoga instructor was playing his role perfectly, the spiritual guide offering private sessions to select clients, all while building his network among the neighborhood's wealthy wives. Dad, can I take the car tomorrow? Emma appeared at his elbow, her expression carefully neutral. I have a study group meeting. Of course, Princess. Derek's voice betrayed nothing of what he knew about these study groups, how they coincided perfectly with Amanda and Salvador's meetings, how his daughter served as their lookout and alibi. Later that night, Derek sat in his home office, reviewing the latest reports from Raoul Levy. The investigator had been thorough, documenting every meeting, every transaction, every little betrayal. The photos showed a clear pattern. Amanda arriving at Greg's startup offices, Salvador following shortly after. Emma's car parked nearby, keeping watch while sending texts about study sessions and client meetings. The financial trail was equally damning. Amanda had diverted over $500,000 from their joint accounts, routing it through various shells and fronts. Some went to Salvador's California property purchases, some to Greg's startup, and some to buy the silence and cooperation of their neighbors. Derek's phone buzzed, a text from Catherine Parsons, documents ready. Moving forward on your signal. He looked at the family photo on his desk, Amanda, Emma, and himself at Emma's high school graduation. All smiles, all perfect, all fake. The frame's glass reflected his own image. A successful man who had dedicated his life to building things, only to discover his family had been systematically dismantling everything he'd created. The migraine was back, pulsing behind his eyes, but Derek welcomed the pain. It helped him focus, helped him remember why he needed to stay sharp. In engineering, precision was everything. One miscalculation, one moment of emotional weakness, and the entire project could collapse. Through the house's excellent acoustics, another of Amanda's design choices, he could hear her on the phone in their bedroom, her voice low but clear. "No, Salvador. He doesn't suspect a thing. Yes, once Emma's last tuition payment clears. I know, baby. I can't wait to start our new life. He's so wrapped up in his precious bridges, he wouldn't notice if I danced naked in his office." Derek allowed himself a small smile. In engineering, every stress test revealed new weaknesses. Every failure pointed the way to a stronger design. His family had taught him the ultimate lesson in structural integrity. Sometimes, the most devastating forces came from within. He turned back to his computer and began to type. The dismantling would begin soon, and like every project he'd ever managed, this one would be executed with absolute precision. After all, he hadn't earned his reputation by leaving jobs half-finished. The first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon as Derek finished his preparations. In a few hours, Amanda would wake up and go about her day, confident in the perfection of her plan. Emma would head to her study group, believing her role as lookout was still a secret. Greg would open his startup's offices, unaware that his money laundering operation was about to implode. And Derek? Derek would do what he did best. Systematically, methodically, ruthlessly solve the problem in front of him. Because that's what engineers did. They identified structural weaknesses, and then they eliminated them. The sun rose fully over the city, its light catching the glass and steel of the buildings Derek had helped design and save. It was going to be a perfect day for demolition. Raul Levy sat across from Derek in a private meeting room at the Harrison Bridge project site, spreading photographs and financial documents across the table. The private investigator's reputation for discretion had made him the perfect choice for this delicate operation. "Let's start with the money trail," Levy said, pulling out a complex flowchart. "Your wife's been systematic. Every withdrawal marked as home renovation research or college expenses has been rerouted through a series of shell companies." Derek studied the diagram. "Show me Salvador's involvement." "Knox established the first shell company 2 weeks after meeting your wife." Levy placed 3 more files on the table. "He's done this before: Arizona, Nevada, and Oregon. Different names, same pattern. He positions himself as a spiritual guide, then gradually takes control of their finances." "The other victims?" 3 wealthy women, all married." Levy's expression hardened slightly. 2 lost everything in divorce. The third, he paused, committed suicide when she discovered the extent of his manipulation. Knox walked away clean each time. Derek's fingers traced the financial flow on the diagram. "The California property? Beachfront estate in Malibu, purchased through Knox Enterprises last month." Levy pulled up satellite images on his tablet. $6 million property. "The down payment came directly from your joint account, laundered through your brother's startup." "Speaking of my brother, Greg's startup is the perfect front." Levy produced more documents. "They're creating fake consulting contracts. Your wife transfers money to shell companies, which then invest in the startup. The startup pays Knox Enterprises for strategic planning, which funds the California property and their other expenses." Derek nodded, his engineers mind cataloging each piece of evidence. "The neighborhood involvement? The Carlsons received $40,000 marked as a personal loan. The Wilders, $35,000. Levy showed bank statements. Both couples have their own secrets. Linda Carlson's having an affair with her tennis instructor. Tom Wilder has gambling debts. Your wife and Knox leveraged this information to build their network of alibis. And Emma?" Levy hesitated before pulling out another file. "Your daughter's role is more significant than we initially thought. She's not just providing alibis or acting as lookout. She's been helping Knox move money, delivering documents between accounts. She thinks she's just running errands for her mother, but she's actually been participating in money laundering." Derek's expression remained neutral, but his fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "Document everything. Every transaction, every meeting, every phone call." After Levy left, Derek made another call. Catherine Parsons, the city's most ruthless divorce attorney, agreed to meet him immediately. In Parsons' corner office, overlooking the city courthouse, Derek watched her review Levy's findings. "Your wife's been clever," Parsons said, adjusting her reading glasses. Having her father advise her was particularly shrewd. "Judge Reynolds knows every loophole in family court. Tell me about his involvement." "He's been coaching her on asset division strategies for months." Parsons pulled out court records. "Weekly meetings disguised as family dinners. He's advising her on how to maximize her claims using your work schedule and emotional unavailability as leverage." "Can he influence the proceedings?" "He's still well-connected, already making calls to former colleagues, trying to ensure the case gets assigned to a friendly judge." Parsons smiled thinly. "But his involvement in hiding assets will be his undoing. No judge will touch this case once that comes out." Derek leaned forward. "I want to protect Emma's education. Whatever happens, she needs to finish medical school. We'll set up an irrevocable trust. They won't be able to touch it." Parsons made notes. "But Derek, you understand what this means? Your daughter's involvement in their scheme will become part of the official record." She made her choice. Derek's voice was steel. "Actions have consequences." Over the next 2 weeks, Derek orchestrated his counter-strategy with military precision. Each evening, after Amanda left for her yoga sessions, he worked systematically through their financial history, documenting every suspicious transaction. The surveillance footage Levy provided painted a damning picture. Amanda and Salvador meeting at Greg's startup offices, their behavior growing more brazen each time. Emma making bank runs, delivering envelopes between accounts. The neighborhood couples providing alibis while accepting payments for their silence. "Your brother's startup is the weak link," Levy reported during their next meeting. "Greg's getting sloppy with the paperwork. Look at these invoices." Derek reviewed the documents. Fake consulting contracts, non-existent clients, inflated fees, all designed to launder his stolen money through the business. Late one night, as Derek worked in his home office, he overheard Amanda on the phone. "Everything's perfect," she was saying. "Salvador's found the most amazing house in Malibu. Once Derek makes that last tuition payment." She laughed. "No, he suspects nothing. Too busy with his precious bridges to notice anything. That's what makes it so perfect. He trusts me completely with the finances." The next day, Derek met with his bank's trust department. The officer, Janet Chin, reviewed his proposal carefully. "An irrevocable trust for your daughter's education?" She looked up. "Once established, neither you nor your wife will have access to these funds." "Exactly." Derek signed the documents. "The only requirement is Emma's GPA stays above 3.8. The money can only be used for tuition and educational expenses. And your other assets? Move them to the secure accounts we discussed. But leave the joint accounts active. I want to see who tries to access them." That evening, Derek met with Judge Reynolds himself, using a charity gala as cover. The older man's confidence was evident in his every gesture. "Derek, Amanda tells me you're working too hard as usual." Reynolds clapped him on the shoulder. "You should take more time for family." "Actually, I've been thinking about estate planning," Derek replied smoothly. "Given your experience in family court, I'd value your opinion on asset protection strategies." Reynolds' eyes lit up with barely concealed interest. "Always happy to advise family. Why don't you come by my office next week?" "Perfect. I'll bring the financial records Amanda's been keeping." The slight widening of Reynolds' eyes confirmed Derek's suspicions. The judge quickly recovered, but the damage was done. The trigger came sooner than expected. Derek's phone buzzed during a project meeting. An alert from his bank. Someone was attempting a large transfer from the joint accounts. He excused himself and called Levy. "They're moving now." "Knox just entered the bank on 5th Street, Levy confirmed. "Your wife's waiting in the car." "Should I follow?" "No need. Let's see how this plays out." Within an hour, his phone exploded with messages. "Amanda, the bank system is down. Did you change something?" "Greg. Hey bro. Having some issues with those investment transfers we discussed?" Salvador's number, which he'd never seen before. "We need to talk about Amanda's accounts." Derek let them stew for 3 hours before responding to Amanda. In meetings, bank called about suspicious activity. Had to freeze everything temporarily. "We'll check later." Her response came instantly. What? We need access now. Emma's tuition is due. He didn't reply. Instead, he called Emma's university directly, speaking with the bursar's office. This is Derek Newton. I understand there's been some confusion about my daughter's tuition payments. Oh yes, Mr. Newton. We received an attempt to withdraw all funds from her education account today, but it was blocked by trust restrictions. Excellent. Please ensure all future transactions require my direct authorization. That evening, Derek arrived home to find Emma waiting in his office, her face flushed with anger. Mom told me everything, she said. How you've been embezzling from your company. How you're trying to ruin her and Salvador's lives because you're jealous of their relationship. Derek sat down calmly, opened his laptop, and turned it toward her. Your mother and Salvador attempted to empty your college fund today. They've been planning this for months. The California house they're planning to move to? Purchased with money stolen from your education account. Emma's face paled as she looked at the documentation. Bank statements, transfer records, surveillance photos. The evidence was overwhelming. But the study sessions, the errands, were cover for their meetings and money laundering. Derek's voice remained steady. Those documents you've been delivering? Financial instruments for moving stolen money. Your mother and Salvador planned to leave you with massive student debt while they enjoyed your education fund in Malibu. Emma sank into a chair, her hands shaking as she scrolled through the evidence. Dad, save it. Derek stood. Your trust fund is secure now. Maintain a 3.8 GPA, and your education is guaranteed. That's more than they planned to leave you with. I didn't know. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. You knew enough. Derek moved toward the door. You chose your side, Emma. Now you'll live with those consequences. Later that night, Amanda stormed into his office, Salvador in tow. Her carefully maintained poise had cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. What have you done? She demanded. Those accounts were joint property. Were they? Derek looked up calmly. Like the joint property you've been funneling to your boyfriend's shell companies? Salvador stepped forward, his yoga instructor serenity replaced by barely controlled anger. Listen, man, you don't want to do this. Think about your reputation. My reputation? Derek's laugh was cold. That's interesting coming from a con man who's done this to 3 other women. Tell me, Salvador, does Amanda know about Helen Richards? The woman who killed herself after you destroyed her life. Amanda's head whipped toward Salvador, the first crack in their united front. He's lying, Salvador said quickly. Baby, he's just trying to turn you against me. The documentation is with my lawyers, Derek continued calmly, along with evidence of every transaction, every meeting, every conspiracy you've orchestrated, including Emma's role as your unwitting money mule. You wouldn't dare expose our daughter, Amanda hissed. Our daughter? Derek's voice could have frozen fire. You were planning to abandon her with massive debt while you lived off her college fund. Don't pretend to care about her now. This isn't over, Salvador threatened. Actually, it is. Derek turned back to his work. You have until tomorrow to return the money you stole, or the evidence goes to the FBI. Your choice. After they left, Derek sat in his darkened office, listening to the sound of Amanda throwing things in their bedroom. His phone buzzed with messages from Greg, from Judge Reynolds, from the Carlsons and Wilders, all frantically trying to understand what was happening to their carefully constructed scheme. Derek ignored them all. The first strike had landed perfectly, exposing the rot at the foundation of their conspiracy. Now it was time for the real demolition to begin. Through his window, he could see the Harrison Bridge illuminated against the night sky. Like any good engineer, he knew that the most spectacular collapses came not from external forces, but from carefully calculated internal pressures. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The look on their faces when they realized he'd known everything, that alone was worth the price of admission. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, lightning illuminating the city in harsh flashes. Derek watched it with appreciation. Nature understood timing too, the perfect backdrop for the destruction to come. Derek sat in his new high-rise apartment, reviewing the final pieces of evidence on his laptop. The city lights spread below him like a circuit board, each connection representing another pressure point in his carefully constructed plan. "The SEC filing is ready," Catherine Parsons said through the speakerphone. "One word from you, and Greg's startup faces a full investigation." "What about Judge Reynolds?" "Our contact at the FBI was very interested in the evidence of his previous bribes. They're prepared to launch an investigation the moment we give them the documentation." Derek checked his watch. 7:15 p.m. Amanda would be at her book club meeting with Salvador, using the Carlson's house as cover again. Everything was prepared: the divorce papers, the evidence packets, the asset freeze documents. Time to begin the endgame. "Execute everything as planned," he told Parsons. "I'll handle the personal aspects." He opened his secure email and sent the first trigger, an anonymous tip to the SEC about Greg's startup. The documentation was comprehensive: fake invoices, money laundering schemes, fraudulent investor reports. Within hours, his brother's carefully constructed house of cards would begin to collapse. Next came the neighborhood couples. Derek had prepared individual packages for the spouses of each conspirator. Tom Wilder's wife would receive proof of not just his gambling debts, but the affairs he'd helped cover up. Linda Carlson's husband would learn about her tennis instructor and the money she'd accepted to provide alibis. The phone rang. "Greg, right on schedule." "Derek." His brother's voice carried barely contained panic. "The SEC just showed up at the office. They're seizing our servers, our documents." "What the hell is happening?" "Interesting timing," Derek replied calmly. "I was just reviewing some of your company's investment records, particularly those involving Knox Enterprises." A long pause. "Bro, I can explain. You helped them steal my money, Greg. Used your startup to launder it. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" "It wasn't like that. Amanda said you were controlling, that she needed help." "Save it for the SEC investigators." Derek's voice was ice. "I'm sure they'll be very interested in how you helped a known con man defraud investors." "Known con man? What are you talking about?" "Ask Salvador about Helen Richards, or Mary Sullivan, or any of his other victims." Derek allowed himself a small smile. "Better hurry. Your investors are about to receive some very interesting documents about where their money really went." He hung up as Greg was still pleading, then sent the second trigger: evidence of Judge Reynolds' past bribes to the FBI. The retired judge had been careful, but not careful enough. His pattern of favorable rulings for certain law firms, followed by mysterious deposits in offshore accounts, formed a damning pattern. Derek's phone buzzed again. "Amanda." "The SEC is at Greg's office," she said without preamble. "What did you do?" "Me? I'm just a boring engineer, remember? Too focused on my precious bridges to notice anything." "Derek, listen to me. Whatever you think you know, I know everything, Amanda. Every meeting with Salvador at Greg's office. Every dollar you stole. Every plan you made to abandon our daughter with massive debt while you enjoyed her college fund in Malibu." Her voice turned sharp. "You can't prove any of that. Check your email. I just sent you a sample of what the FBI now has, including footage of you and Salvador laughing about how easily you fooled me. The audio quality is excellent. They'll have no trouble understanding you calling me a predictable fool who trusts me too much to check the accounts." Silence on the line. "Your father's involvement was sloppy," Derek continued. "Accepting bribes during his judgeship. The FBI's very interested in reviewing his old cases." "You wouldn't dare," Amanda hissed. "He's Emma's grandfather. Like that mattered when you planned to steal her future? The same Emma you used as a money mule in your little scheme? We can work this out." Her voice turned pleading. "For Emma's sake. Emma's education is secure in an irrevocable trust. More than you plan to leave her with." Derek's tone remained clinical. "As for working it out, check your bedroom when you get home. I left some paperwork for you and Salvador to review." The neighborhood erupted in chaos over the next few hours. Linda Carlson's husband threw her out after receiving proof of her affair. Tom Wilder's wife discovered not just his gambling debts, but the multiple affairs he'd helped cover up. The carefully constructed network of lies collapsed like a house of cards. Derek watched from his new apartment as police cars gathered outside Judge Reynolds' house. The FBI had moved quickly on the bribery evidence. Tomorrow's newspapers would destroy what remained of the retired judge's reputation. His phone kept buzzing, desperate messages from Amanda, Greg, the neighbors. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the final phase of his plan. At exactly 10 p.m., he received confirmation. Amanda had returned home and found his package. The security cameras he'd left in place captured her reaction as she opened it. Divorce papers citing fraud and conspiracy. Evidence of every betrayal, including Emma's unknowing role. Notice of his resignation and acceptance of a position in Seattle. Documentation of all secured assets. The USB drive containing their recorded conversations. Salvador arrived shortly after, his yoga instructor serenity shattered as he read through the evidence. He has everything. Amanda's voice was clear through the security feed. Every meeting, every transfer, every conversation. He's bluffing, Salvador snapped, but his face had lost its confident smile. He can't prove. He has video of us in Greg's office. Audio of everything we said. Records of the property purchases, the shell companies. Amanda sank onto the bed. He even has proof of what you did to those other women. Salvador's mask cracked completely. Those bitches deserved what they got. And so do you if you're stupid enough to believe. Get out. Amanda's voice was hollow. Just get out. Baby, don't let him manipulate you. Manipulate me? She laughed hysterically. Look at this evidence. He knew everything, recorded everything, and we played right into his hands. You said he was too boring, too predictable to figure it out. We can still get to the accounts. They're frozen. All of them. Even Emma's trust fund is locked where we can't touch it. Amanda's voice broke. It's over, Salvador. He destroyed us so completely. Derek switched off the feed. In his new apartment, surrounded by the essential items he'd gradually moved over the past weeks, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Every calculation had been perfect, every reaction predicted, every weakness exploited. His phone buzzed one final time. Emma, Dad. Her voice was small, broken. I just saw the divorce papers. The evidence. I didn't know about the college fund, about what they planned. But you knew enough, Derek replied calmly. Every time you played lookout, every document you carried, every lie you told. I'm sorry. Please, I didn't understand. Your trust fund is secure. Maintain a 3.8 GPA, and your education is guaranteed. That's more consideration than you showed me. Dad, please don't shut me out. Goodbye, Emma. Contact my lawyers if you have questions about the trust requirements. He ended the call and walked to the window. Below, the city continued its rhythmic pattern, unaware of the destruction he'd orchestrated. The Harrison Bridge stood in the distance, a testament to his ability to solve complex structural problems. Some people might have sought reconciliation, might have allowed emotion to weaken their resolve. But Derek was an engineer. He understood that some structures couldn't be repaired once the foundation was compromised. Sometimes, the only solution was complete demolition and rebuilding somewhere else. His phone buzzed again, confirmation that the SEC had frozen Greg's startup's assets. More messages followed. The FBI expanding their investigation into Judge Reynolds' past cases, the Carlsons filing for divorce, the Wilders' marriage imploding as more affairs came to light. Amanda's text carried desperation. The house is half empty. Where are you? He didn't respond. Let her discover gradually how thoroughly he'd planned this. How every item he'd owned before their marriage, every asset he'd purchased afterward, had been quietly moved and secured. Let her face the frozen accounts, the pending litigation, the complete dismantling of her California dreams. The next morning, Derek walked into his office at the engineering firm and submitted his resignation. His new position in Seattle was already secured, the contract signed, the arrangements made. But the Harrison Bridge project, his boss protested, is completed, documented, and ready for handover, Derek replied. Like every project I've ever managed. He left the office for the last time, ignoring the messages accumulating on his phone. Amanda had discovered she couldn't access any accounts. Salvador's creditors had found him. Greg's investors were demanding answers. Judge Reynolds' colleagues were distancing themselves as the FBI investigation expanded. The local news was already picking up the stories. Prominent judge under FBI investigation. Tech startup faces SEC pro. Multiple divorce filings rock exclusive neighborhood. Derek drove to his new apartment, watching his old life disappear in the rearview mirror. He'd given them exactly what they deserved. Amanda and Salvador's dreams shattered, Greg's startup imploding, the neighborhood couples facing their own destruction, Emma learning the cost of betrayal while still receiving an education she didn't deserve. His phone buzzed one final time. Catherine Parsons. "It's done," she said. "Every asset secured, every account frozen, every piece of evidence submitted. They won't recover from this." Good. Derek looked out over his new view. "Send me the Seattle paperwork. Time to build something new." The sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the Harrison Bridge. Derek Newton had built his reputation by solving impossible problems, by turning failing projects into successes. Now he'd applied those same skills to dismantling the elaborate deception his family had constructed. Let them face the consequences of their choices. Let them understand that every betrayal had a price. He had a new life to build, and engineers didn't waste time looking back at demolished structures. The final text from Amanda remained unanswered. "How long did you know?" "Long enough," he thought. Long enough to plan the perfect demolition. The Seattle skyline beckoned in his mind. New projects, new challenges, new structures to build. Behind him, the carefully orchestrated destruction would continue, each betrayer facing their own personal collapse. Derek Newton had given them exactly what they deserved. The perfect execution of their imperfect betrayal. Extended epilogue. 5 years later. The Seattle skyline painted a stark silhouette against the morning sun as Derek Newton reviewed blueprints in his corner office. At 50, his success had only grown. 3 major infrastructure projects completed ahead of schedule, 2 industry awards, and a reputation for turning impossible situations into triumphs. "Mr. Newton?" His assistant Sarah Chin knocked on the door. "The mayor's office called. They want to fast-track the waterfront development project." "Send them the preliminary assessments," Derek replied, not looking up from his work. "And the background check on that new engineering firm?" "Just came in. Clean record, solid financials." Sarah hesitated. "Also, Ms. Parsons called from back east. She said you'd want to know about some developments." Derek nodded, already reaching for his phone. Catherine Parsons had kept tabs on the aftermath of his departure, monitoring the collapse of his former life with professional thoroughness. Amanda's furniture store job didn't last, Parsons reported without preamble. She's on her 3rd retail position in 2 years. The bankruptcy proceedings finally completed. She couldn't keep up the payments on her studio apartment. Salvador? Facing trial in Nevada. 3 more victims came forward after your evidence exposed his pattern. The DA's offering 20 years. Parsons' satisfaction was evident. He tried contacting Amanda for bail money. She blocked his number. Derek allowed himself a small smile. The neighborhood? The Carlsons divorced. Linda's tennis instructor dumped her. Apparently, she couldn't afford his private lessons anymore. Tom Wilder's wife took him for everything in their divorce. He's working as a night security guard now. Parsons paused. Your brother Greg finished his community service. He's selling used cars in Phoenix. And the good judge? Reynolds died last year. Heart attack during his FBI deposition. The investigation into his judicial corruption expanded to 3 decades of cases. His reputation was completely destroyed. Another pause. Amanda didn't even attend her father's funeral, couldn't afford the plane ticket. Derek turned to his window, watching construction crews work on his latest project. And Emma? Graduated medical school last month. 3.85 GPA, just above the trust requirement. She's starting her residency at Mayo Clinic. Parsons' voice softened slightly. She still sends monthly emails asking to meet. Forward those to the usual folder. Derek's tone remained professional. Anything else? Amanda's been asking around about you. Someone told her about your success in Seattle. She's been trying to find your contact information. Derek's laugh held no warmth. I'm sure she has. Forward any messages to legal. After hanging up, Derek reviewed his calendar. A charity gala tonight. He'd been named Engineering Executive of the Year. His date, Claire Thompson, was a corporate lawyer who understood the value of emotional distance. They enjoyed each other's company without complications, exactly as he preferred. His phone buzzed, an email notification. Emma's monthly attempt at contact. Dear Dad, graduated medical school last month. Starting residency at Mayo Clinic. I know you already know this. You've managed my trust fund perfectly, like everything else. I understand now what you taught me about consequences. Every time I make hospital rounds, I remember how methodically you exposed our betrayal. Mom's not doing well. Salvador's trial is all over the news. She finally admitted everything. How they planned to steal my future, how she used me to help deceive you. She's working retail again, can barely make rent. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I've learned from your calculated response. Ensuring my education while severing emotional ties was its own form of perfect revenge. You made sure I'd succeed while never letting me forget the price of betrayal. If you're ever willing to talk, love, Emma. Derek archived the email without replying. His daughter had learned her lesson. Success tainted by the knowledge of what she'd thrown away. Some bridges, once burned, should stay demolished. Across the country, Amanda Newton, now Amanda Reynolds again, locked up the small furniture store where she worked. At 47, the stress of the past 5 years had taken its toll. Her designer clothes were long gone, replaced by off-the-rack retail uniforms. The plastic name tag reading, assistant manager, felt like a constant reminder of her fall. Her studio apartment waited, walls bare where expensive art once hung. The TV was tuned to news about Salvador's trial. 3 more wealthy women had come forward, describing the same pattern of manipulation and theft. His smooth yoga instructor persona had cracked during cross-examination, revealing the predator beneath. She thought about Derek sometimes, seeing his name attached to massive successful projects. The local news had covered his latest award. He looked distinguished in the photos, power and confidence evident in every line. The woman on his arm was elegant, professional. Everything Amanda had thrown away. Her phone held hundreds of unsent messages to him. Apologies, explanations, pleas for help. None of them mattered. Derek had orchestrated their destruction with the same precision he brought to his engineering projects. The evidence he'd gathered had been comprehensive, the timing perfect, the execution flawless. A text from Emma lit up her screen. Mom, saw the news about Salvador's trial. Are you okay? Amanda stared at the message. Her daughter's success felt like another part of Derek's revenge, ensuring Emma achieved everything they'd planned to steal from her, while making sure she understood exactly what her betrayal had cost. Across town, Greg Newton arranged cars on his used car lot. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, making his cheap suit stick to his skin. The SEC investigation had destroyed more than his startup. His reputation in tech was ruined, his assets seized, his investors' lawsuits still pending. He tried contacting Derek multiple times over the years. His brother's response had been silence, broken only by formal communications through lawyers. The precision of Derek's revenge still stunned him. How he'd gathered evidence for months, planning the perfect moment to trigger their collective destruction. In Nevada, Salvador Knox sat in county jail, awaiting trial. His designer yoga wear had been replaced by prison orange, his confident smile erased by the weight of evidence against him. Derek's meticulous documentation had exposed decades of cons, leading more victims to come forward. His latest lawyer, a public defender, had been blunt. Take the plea deal. 20 years is better than what you'll get at trial. Salvador had tried contacting Amanda, hoping she had hidden resources. Her response had been to block his number. The woman who'd once planned to share his Malibu dream now wouldn't even accept his calls. Back in Seattle, Derek left his office for the charity gala. Claire waited in the lobby, elegant in a blue evening gown. Congratulations on the award, she said, accepting his offered arm. Though I heard some interesting gossip about your past. Ancient history, Derek replied smoothly. Thoroughly documented and filed away. Claire smiled, understanding perfectly. They made a striking couple, successful, controlled, emotionally distant. Exactly what Derek required now. The gala celebrated his latest triumph. Another failing project turned successful, another impossible problem solved. His acceptance speech was professional, focused on engineering excellence and project management precision. Only he knew that his greatest project had been the systematic dismantling of his betrayers' lives. Every detail planned, every reaction predicted, every consequence precisely calculated. Later that night, Derek stood in his penthouse apartment, watching his city sparkle below. Seattle had welcomed him, rewarding his expertise with greater successes. His new life was exactly what he designed: controlled, profitable, and free from emotional complications. His phone buzzed with another news alert. Yoga instructor faces 20 years for fraud scheme. Salvador's unshaven face filled the screen, his yoga serenity replaced by desperate fear. Another email from Emma arrived. Dad, finished my first week of residency. Still learning from your lessons about consequences. Amanda's latest attempt to contact him had been blocked by his lawyers. Greg's monthly request for reconciliation went unopened. Judge Reynolds' posthumous disgrace continued to unfold in legal journals. Derek allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. 5 years had proven the perfection of his revenge. He had crafted their destruction as carefully as he designed his bridges, ensuring their punishment was both complete and enduring. The Seattle night stretched before him, full of new projects and opportunities. Behind him, the wreckage of his former life served as a constant reminder. Every betrayal had its price, and Derek Newton knew exactly how to collect. He turned back to his latest blueprints. The past was thoroughly documented and filed away. He had new structures to build, new challenges to solve. And if his success served as a constant reminder to those who had betrayed him, well, that was just another perfectly calculated outcome. The price of betrayal had been high, but Derek had made sure they all paid in full.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
My wife asked for separation, citing that I was a man-child. I admit, I would rather play video games than do chores. I was very forgetful about everything. I wasn't that involved with our kids. Her nagging made me more stressed out. She finally had enough and kicked me out. I just felt a sense of relief. No more nagging, no more stress. Nothing. When I got to my apartment, I cleaned everything. I stopped forgetting things. It made sense to wash dishes now, and it made sense to make my bed. I felt the urge to clean. It was like I was a different man. I was more involved with my kids, and it made sense now to pack lunch for them, to read them bedtime stories. Whereas in our marriage, I just felt burdened. I still played video, but it was not like the addiction I used to have. It's like my problems and all the mental blocks just ended overnight. I looked online for more advice on life after divorce and was told to go to the gym. I did it once. The gym is not for me. I do some jumping jacks and stuff for 15 minutes a day and eat healthy. I have lost 30 pounds in 4 months. I've been dipping my feet in dating too, and I have, or had, a kind of friends with benefits situationship. I'm taking things casual for now. All in all, my life is going on an upward trajectory. I've realized that I'm not a man-child, more so my wife is a bad partner, and that's why I used to seek comfort in video games and felt no motivation in life. When I separated from her, I became better almost instantly. My wife has seen my change and wants to get back together. I was wishy-washy in rejecting her at first, but I've made up my mind now and told her that she's better off without me, which is actually true. She wasn't wrong in leaving me, for her and me. She will not take that for a reason. She insists that she'll decide what's good for her and that I should return. I've been very nice while rejecting her offer. It's not like I'm being an idiot to her. She just wouldn't let it go. Why is she taking it all on her ego? She asked me why, and I told her she was truly better off without me. She found out about my friend with benefits, most likely because I posted a pic of us hiking together and contacted her to say that I'm a married man with kids and she shouldn't become a homewrecker. My friend with benefits told me that she doesn't want drama in her life and ended things with me, which sucks pretty bad. I don't know why my wife is being like that. I've been very nice but firm with her, and I'm not giving her any mixed signals. She just won't let it go. She's so determined to cause me trouble. Am I the idiot for not wanting to get back to my wife after separation? You are the idiot, dude. You aren't being honest with her. You're only telling her that she's better off without you. And even if you believe that's true, it isn't why you don't want to get back together with her. It is sending her mixed messages, because when she sees you making changes she's been asking you to make, she probably feels hopeful that you guys can move forward. She doesn't have the insight because you haven't communicated that with her. Tell her that you also feel like you are a better version of yourself when you're not in that marriage. Now is your chance to not be a man-child for real. Grow up. Tell her the truth. Jesus, I can see why she kicked him out. The fact that he thinks he's all grown up now is honestly just absurd. He's happier single because he cleans for himself, etc. While he lived there, it was all about him too. Now he doesn't want to be the bad guy by being honest. Man-child has no guts at all, and he doesn't want to leave his wife. He wants her to divorce him so he can play the victim. Yeah, it was all the wife's fault for nagging. Oh my God, she was nagging, when at the very beginning, he admitted he absolutely was a man-child. It wasn't until he actually had to clean up after himself, but to him, it just made sense. No, jerk, you lost your intimacy maid. No one's gonna do it unless you get up off your lazy butt, put the controller down, and actually do it yourself. The only thing he's done is prove that he could have been helping her that whole time and chose not to. And he's been blaming her for everything no matter what, because he never actually grew up. I realized my wife is a bad partner. Man, she wasn't a bad partner. She was your crutch. She carried the whole family on her back while you played video games. She is better off without you. I had 2 weekends a month of custody of my kids. Not that I didn't fight for equal custody, but I lost. I decided to give up custody of my kids because I was bleeding money. I was paying a lot of money on rent, and coupled with child support, it was not sustainable for me in the long run. I gave up the rest of the physical custody. It did increase my child support by 10%, but that was way below what I was paying for rent. I moved to my parents' basement to save some money. That's when the tide started turning in my favor. One of my coworkers, let's call him Richard, wanted a cheap place to rent, and I convinced my parents to let him rent their basement and let me stay in my childhood bedroom, aka a new gym room. It wasn't easy and a lot to ask, but I was able to show a somewhat concrete financial plan. For 2 years, Richard, now my best friend, rented my parents' basement, and I lived with my parents in my old room. My parents sacrificed to let me stay for 2 years. I saved a lot of money by not spending on anything other than food. I didn't buy any clothes, not even underwear, never went on a vacation, and never went anywhere that would require any kind of money. I was not able to qualify for a mortgage because of child support obligation, so I took my savings and my parents combined it with rent money from my coworker to put a down payment on a house. I've lived in that house for 6 years now. I rent it from my parents because they take normal rent from me and pay the mortgage, and the rest goes into a fund for me. I got a roommate too, so technically, I live for free. This has helped me to save a lot of money. My parents are still renting their basement, as they felt lonely after Richard and I left. Richard also bought a house in my neighborhood. All in all, life was difficult, but now it's good. I've saved a lot of money, and I'm planning a comfortable retirement. So after 6 years, I finally have discretionary money to spend. So I took a week off from work last year and traveled with my girlfriend, and I flaunted it on social media. My ex-wife suddenly started texting me that I was a deadbeat. I never missed a child support payment, and selfish, as I should have taken the kids on vacation. When I gave up the custody, I would have to beg her to let me talk to my kids. I remember the day when she asked for more money and refused to let me talk to my kids if I didn't give it to her. That was the last day I ever contacted her or my kids, so I didn't think she would even let me take the kids on vacation. I wrote about my journey to show that it wasn't easy to reach the place I am now, but I made it by sacrifice on my part and my parents' part. I have a house and money that I earned for myself. I should be able to flaunt it and enjoy it as I please. Am I the idiot? You are the idiot. You gave up custody. She won't let me talk to my kids is like the deadbeat dad motto. If you kept custody like a decent person, she legally could not keep you from them. But you gave up custody and blamed her for your predicament. Yeah, this doesn't even make sense. What was the point of fighting for custody if you were just going to throw away your time anyway? If you were given every other weekend, you had secured access to your kids. It makes no sense for you to have thrown that away. Have you saved any money towards your kids' future? Or is that based on your ex letting you see them? And while congratulations on rebuilding your life, are you suspiciously vague as to why you split with your ex? And it's Richard's money and your parents' generosity that rebuilt you, not your hard work. Not the idiot for going on holiday and posting it on social media, as that was the question. You are, however, a massive idiot for abandoning your kids. You had custody for 2 weekends per month, which you gave up. Why couldn't you continue seeing your kids while living with your parents? Your ex is right. You are a deadbeat father. Even though you pay your child support every month, you chose not to contact your kids for 6 years. The worst part, you're so darn proud of this. I really hope your ex is remarried and they call her husband dad. I, 30 female, lost my husband 4 years ago. We share 2 children. Our son is a tween and our daughter is a young grammar schooler. Since my husband's death, I've focused on myself and my children, and I have no interest in dating or finding another husband. My mom had experience with this when my sister and I were children, young grammar schoolers. We lost our dad, and our mom remarried 15 months later. At the time, she told us we were getting a new dad. Once her husband arrived, there was no expectation and pressure to call him dad, and our mom took down all photos of dad. We, my sister and I, took some photos of dad and hid them with our friends out of fear mom would destroy or throw them all away. She didn't, but the ones we didn't take were locked in storage and have never seen the light of day. My sister asked for them occasionally and was told she didn't need them. Our dad's stuff is likely in there too, if they weren't tossed into the garbage. It caused a lot of strain between us and our mom. For the last 2 years, my mom has been dropping hints that I should get back out there, and I always said that I didn't want to, or I would ignore it. Then a couple of months ago, she told me I needed to get my kids a dad before it was too late, that I needed a husband. I told her they have a dad who doesn't need replacing. She dropped it for another few weeks, but then she brought it up to me last week. She told me the kids need a dad, and I need a husband around, or I'll be alone and lonely for the rest of my life. She told me I couldn't remain dedicated to being my husband's wife for the rest of my life. She said I'm too young, and the kids are too young to never get another dad. I told her I don't want another husband, and my kids don't need another dad. She asked me where would I be if she had that mindset and I didn't have a dad. I told her I lost my dad at 6 and miss him every day, and I never had another one. Things escalated from there, and she asked me how I could say that when her husband had been my dad for 24 years. I told her he never has been and never will be, and just because she replaced my dad doesn't mean I want to replace my husband. Mom was furious and told me that wasn't fair and that I should understand her better. I told her I understood her even less after losing my husband because I would never remove all traces of him from the home, and I would never deny my kids his things the way she did. I would never force my kids to call someone else dad, and I told her I couldn't even imagine wanting to find them someone else to call dad. I told her they had an amazing dad, and he's still their dad, just the way mine will always be my dad. She called me spiteful and selfish, and she went to my sister for backup, but she told her she feels the same way. My aunt, who's my mom's sister, told me I shouldn't have said what I did, and accusing her of replacing my dad instead of just seeing that she wanted us happy is cruel, and I'm old enough that I should understand. Am I the idiot? Not the idiot. Off the top, I'm sorry for your loss, and I hope your kids keep getting to know their dad through your and other loved ones' memories of him. There is some validity And your mom saying you shouldn't have to feel like you need to live as your husband's widow forever. You can treasure that love and also find new love. But your mom is majorly overstepping. Your kids don't need a father. They need role models in their lives. And you don't need to be married to that person for them to be a positive influence. It's clear your mom was scared to be alone, but her fear had a profound impact on you that wasn't positive. And she's old enough to understand that her choices have consequences. Honey, you mustn't repeat your mother's mistakes to validate her feelings. Your mom should have never tried to replace your dad. The way she handled your childhood was unhealthy for you and for her. It sounds like you're just now getting a chance to get these pent-up feelings out. And your mom's probably very defensive because she's either in denial about how much your actions mess with you or too upset to understand how much your actions mess with you. It's good that you were able to get it out there. My friend has been married for a year now to her firefighter husband. She's the only one in the friend group that is married. I usually host dinners every couple of months, and we'll do a late one for the holidays on Friday. I usually invite him, but money's gotten tight due to the holidays, and he eats so much. I understand why, but it always results in me doubling the recipes or running out of food. So this time I told everyone that I just wanted to do a girls' night. This means my friend's husband is not invited. If he isn't there, there's enough food for everyone without the double recipes. She called me up asking why I was doing a girls' night. I told her the truth that I couldn't afford to make double for dinner, and her husband ate a lot. She called me a jagoff, and now she's telling my friends why. Everyone is split, and no one offers to help with the food bill. So, am I the idiot? Is he insisting on more food? You also didn't need to tell her the real reason if you didn't want to, and you've probably made him feel crappy. To be honest, if money is tight, maybe don't host dinners or ask everyone to bring a dish. Then you have to pay for less, and they can double up their recipe. You are the idiot and should probably just have told the group it's getting expensive. You are happy to host, but bringing dishes and contributing to the cost would help instead of singling out one person and making them feel guilty for eating. Still, I understand that times are tough and money's tight for everyone, so it can be really difficult. So I do feel for you in that sense. I offered the group the option to Venmo me some money or change it to a potluck. They don't agree. He eats 2 to 3 servings. He eats more than everyone else. So if I don't double it, some of the girls will be hungry if he gets his fill, since he'll eat it all. Another option is he's still hungry, which seems to be a no, since that happened the first time, and everyone was upset. He sounds like an extremely rude dinner guest. I wouldn't invite him to my home either. When I go spend time with friends who are tight on funds, I make sure to bring my own food or expect to pay for pizza or something. I'd never expect them to fund my meals, particularly if I knew I was a big eater. You are not the idiot. And friend and husband should have chipped in with a big side dish of something and a bottle of wine. How do 2 people think that they're regularly going to dinner at someone's house and not contributing? Husband has no manners, but OP let it go on for too long. The husband shouldn't have been there to begin with. You did nothing wrong in arranging a smaller party to manage cost. Your friend just sounds entitled and ridiculous. Oh man, I had a weekend guest once. I made this nice pot roast for dinner and was going to serve the leftovers for lunch the next day. It seemed reasonable since it was the 3 of us and a baby. And he wasn't a bodybuilder or anything, large framed, but an IT guy. He kept saying how good the meal was, and then he ate half of the pot roast in one sitting, you guys. I had to scramble to figure out lunch, and we're low-budget farm people who make everything from scratch. And I have to say, it was a factor in not going out of my way to invite him again. He's still a good friend, but not every friend is a good house guest. I am very, very frustrated. My son has been married to my daughter-in-law for 3 years now. I've always made extra dishes that didn't include meat to accommodate her. No matter how much it was a pain to do, I always made sure she had options to eat when I hosted, or she was over. She's a vegetarian and at one point tried to go vegan. My son and she never hosted due to living in a small apartment, but that changed as they just bought a home. They're having dinner this week, and I called her to remind her that I'm allergic to nuts. She then informed me that she didn't have time and told me to bring my own food. She told me that she cooks with a lot of different nuts and can't adjust her menu. This is where I might be the jerk. I told her I wouldn't be going, and neither would my husband. I've accommodated her for years, and I've never made her bring her food. This started an argument where she thought I was being unreasonable. My husband is on my side, but she and my son are very upset. Not the idiot. Allergies are not food critiques. You can die from a bad reaction. The fact you were accommodating her dietary request and then she's completely dismissive of your actual needs is absurd. Definitely don't go to dinner when the chef is blasé about trying to kill you. You accommodated her, even when her accommodations weren't necessary, and dependent on the nut allergy, you could just die being around them. The utter disregard for someone's safety is wild to me. Nuts aren't even used as the main ingredients in most foods, so not subbing out is wild to me. The idea that she can't change the menu because of a significant allergy is giving off the vibe that she did this intentionally.